I don't think we're limiting it. I think, I don't have the, I'm not saying that we need to limit people to a certain size, but I think it's important to understand what's an actual height. That's-
Hey.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we'll call the Wednesday, February 19th, 2025 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. Mr. Trainer, can you do a roll call, please?
Yep, Madam Chair. Mr. Polinsky? Yeah, here. Mr. Duncan?
Here?
Mr. Krasner?
I'm here.
Ms. Comont?
Here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Ms. Friedlander?
Here.
Mr. Kravinsky?
Here.
Thank you, we have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Next item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Any requests for changes? If not, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
Move to adopt the meeting agenda. Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have no speaker series tonight, so that brings us to item 5, which is receipt of petitions. Mr. Trainer, can you give us a summary of the written correspondence we've received?
Sure, Madam Chair. Bob Legenes wrote in with concerns about parking under the proposed accessory dwelling update. Jean Gresco wrote in with recommendations for attachments for accessory dwelling, staff reports in the future. Sam Kasman wrote the Planning Commission in support of the 312 Shadow Walk RPA exception that the Planning Commission is having their public hearing on tonight. And Christina Mitchell also wrote in with concerns of the accessory dwelling proposal.
Great, thank you. And do we have any in-person petitions tonight?
I have not received any speaker slips, but if there's anyone in the audience that is interested in giving public comment tonight.
Would anybody like to speak tonight?
Which item
Would
would
you
you
like
like to speak on tonight?
Oh, would you like to deliver a public comment?
Which item is it?
Okay.
Are we not? Okey-dokey.
Okay, all right, great. So no other in-person petitions tonight. So I think we can move on to our action items. And our first action item is the 312 Shadow Walk RPA exception public hearing. I know we're running a little ahead of schedule, but hopefully we have everybody in the room that needs to be here.
It looks like the city stormwater engineer, Bahailu Keifel, just joined. So, Mr. Fuller, I don't know if
Okay,
you want
great. Yeah, please, Mr. Fuller, can you give us?
Yes, I will
Introduce the item.
introduce the item. This item is a request for an exception for, to allow for development within the seaward portion of a resource protection area under our Chesapeake Bay ordinance, and that's an RPA. We have a public hearing tonight on the application, and the proposal is to construct a screen porch on an existing deck in the rear of the property at 312 Shadow Walk. On February 5th, you had a work session on this item, and it was discussed, and we had a Q&A. And so tonight is the final public hearing on this item. And at this time, the staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve this exception. And at this point, we'll turn it back over to you, and then we have Mr. Pence and Beverly here in the public comment period.
Okay, great, thank you. So I think we can proceed to the staff report and then open the public hearing. Is that a good order of events?
That was basically a summary of the staff report.
Oh, okay. So
so-
there's no additional staff report tonight?
I mean, yeah, no, it's essentially the same as was presented to you in the work session.
Okay, understood.
And so at this point, there's been no further updates to it or changes.
Okay, so then I think we can open the public hearing and hear any of the members of the public that wish to speak on the item 312 Shadow Walk, the RPA exception public hearing. If you'd like to speak on this item, would you like to walk up to the podium? And if you could state your name and address, please.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Is it on? I guess it is. I'm in favor of the exception. I built that house, and I probably should have put a patio on it when I built it, but I didn't. So he's certainly entitled to one of the long-term residents in the subdivision. And if you have any questions of me, you're welcome to do so. Otherwise, I think I've said my piece.
Great. Thank you for your comments, and thank you for coming out tonight. Yeah, when did you build the house, actually? I guess we have a question from a fellow commissioner. What year did you build the house?
I've owned the property for 40
Speaking to the mic.
Oh, yeah. I've owned the property for 40 years. When I bought it, it was a nursing home, yeah, and I bought it because my wife wanted a bigger house. And God knows we got one. I really didn't realize at the time that there was 5 acres of land behind the house that could be subdivided. So I'm an engineer by training, builder, and so that was a windfall, so to speak. So I subdivided and just sold the last of the 10 lots in the community Sam Casman and his family were one of the early buyers, and have been very quiet and very good neighbors. So there is no sensible objection to that. It won't be visible to anybody but people walking along on the bike trail, and I really doubt with the foliage that they could see it from their bike trail.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your comments, and thanks again for coming tonight.
welcome.
Appreciate it. Did you have additional?
I just had a question.
Could you come up to the microphone just so the,
I didn't realize,
just so it'll be
do
recorded?
it here. I didn't realize that it was going to be built on an existing wood deck. So how much of the RPA are they going to need to take to have whatever easement or whatever that's required to make that an enclosed screen porch?
Could you also state your name and
Oh, I'm
address
sorry,
just for the
Beverly
record?
Bose, and I'm a renter in his house at 335 Little Falls,
Okay, thank you.
and help him conduct business. And so the other question that we had when we were discussing stuff is, what kind of precedent does this set for all the other people that are on the cul-de-sac? You know, are they allowed to, you know, ask for a variance, and will they get it if this person did, you know, because there are other houses on that cul-de-sac? So, anyway, I know there's been issues with the sewer and the RPA and other things at the planning committee, so we're just asking what precedence does it set, and that would be the only objection, is that if it's going to make it where anyone can ask for, you know, a variance, then I would say no, but I'm just a renter here in Falls Church. I don't own the property, so.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
We have, I'll attempt to answer those questions, and then the engineer who is the case manager on this application, Behailu, he may have some additional comments. For your first question is how much of the RPA? The RPA is a 100-foot buffer area, and the first 50 feet are landward, and then the other more sensitive 50 feet are seaward. This is in the seaward 50 feet. However, the land disturbance is really not for the existing deck, because that exists. And so, you know, that is allowed as an existing feature. And the porch is actually going on the raised deck, so it's actually not even touching the ground. So there is really no disturbance of the ground there. The disturbance is as a result of bringing the equipment in to then build the structure in the back. And then they would actually restore the vegetation to even more vegetation than exists currently. And so for the long-term effect of water quality, this is not water quantity, water quality, it would be an improvement for the site post-construction of the porch. And so they're not actually digging and disturbing this area where, you know, the water, and this designation runs through the entire property. It's fairly extensive, the designation on it. But anyway, so that's basically how much of the RPA and kind of the impact. On the precedent setting, I've been here 35 years, and this is the first request we've had for an exception. And it is the authority of the Planning Commission to look at the case and to either grant that exception or not. And so, you know, you have a citizen body that, you know, is looking at this, and we have a city engineer that has looked at this carefully and recommended approval of this in this case. And I think by my description, you can see the minimal impact, and actually post-porch, it'll actually be a better property for the RPA and the water quality. Actually, the water quality is associated with the vegetation being able to absorb and kind of clean up that water as it drains off, or rainwater and things like that. So precedent setting, it's the first one we've seen. Each case is on its own merits. the fact that the disturbance is so limited in this case and it's temporary, I think that's unique, and this case would probably be that unique, and so others could request something like this, but they would have to make their own case, and, you know, the disturbance being very minimal.
I guess I'm confused because of the.
Can you stand up for the microphone so we get it on tape, otherwise?
Yeah, I'm just a little confused because I thought the screen porch was to be built on top of the deck.
It
Is
is.
it going to be a separate
The deck's already there.
addition to the house, or is it going to be on the deck?
It's on the deck,
Okay.
yeah. It's not a new
So
deck.
the porch, when it was built, did not require a variance to the RPA?
The deck.
I mean, the deck?
The
Before.
the deck was pre-existing, I believe, but Bahailo, do you know I didn't look at the history on the property. I know this is, I believe, the second owner.
Yeah, the deck is already existing. They are adding the porch on the top of the deck. I know the deck is, the porch is a little bit extended out outside of the deck, but it's built on the existing deck.
Thank you.
I can answer some of those questions if you would like for me to. If you'd prefer that I, as the property owner, butt out, I'm happy to do that as well. Please let me know.
No, we're happy to hear from you, and if you have any additional comments that you want to make before we close the public hearing and move on to planning commissioner discussion, you're welcome to make those now.
Sure. Well, first I'll answer the question. The deck did not require a variance because it was not roofed and thus not impermeable surface. So it did not trigger this process back in the day. It also, much like the house, pre-existed the designation of the RPA. In terms of precedence, I am essentially the only property that is this heavily in an RPA that I have found in Falls Church City. So I think it would be very unusual to see something else come up. You know, to your point, it was 35 years, and this is the first one that's been seen. My goal is to leave no trace, essentially. The property will be better at the end than it is now. It is important to me that that be true. You know, we have invested in significant remediation to avoid any material harm. Honestly, no one should notice this or suffer from it in any material way, and the water quality should improve. So I hope that I have put something together that makes sense. This is just sort of the fallout of the Chesapeake Bay Act being passed after the house was built.
Great, thank you for your comments. Any additional public comment on this item? Okay, if not, I think we can close the public hearing and move along to planning commissioner discussion.
I have some questions for staff.
Sure?
I wasn't at the,
Yeah, please, Mr.
I wasn't at the
Kastner.
work session, so I have some questions for staff. And I appreciate it. I did watch the tape. I appreciate the chairman reading. I had sent in a question in advance because I wasn't going to be here. So I did hear that, and I did hear the answer. But I guess the question I had, again, this is all about water quality. I mean, I don't want to give everyone a, lesson in RPAs. Sounds like we have a lot of knowledgeable people here. But it's not about disturbances. It is about disturbance, but at the end of the day, it's about impervious cover and water quality, and there are different ways to address the water quality. I mean, one thing I think that is missing in our motion is the whole idea about, if you look at the standard in the ordinance, E, reasonable and appropriate conditions are imposed which will prevent the exception request from causing a degradation of water quality. I did see some references to tree plantings and vegetation that will be planted. In fact, the WQIA, which is attached, includes that, but I don't know why we don't have a condition as part of the motion that requires the installation of that to occur, and also requires that it be maintained and not removed if they die, if they are diseased in 3 years, that it be replaced with something with a similar plant. I think that's important. Also, when the property is sold, if this owner moves in 5 or 10 years, the restriction should carry forward. It's still RPA. And the fact that the house pre-exists RPA is certainly a good justification to ask for relief, but that was the reason why the Chesapeake Bay Act was passed. I mean, it was intentionally passed and mapped on existing developed land, knowing that it was going to put an extra encumbrance on that land, but it also provides, through the adoption at the local level of an ordinance, to provide relief but subject to these conditions. So the key thing there is that those conditions. And I don't see any conditions in the approval motion. I just see you approve it. But you can't approve it without the conditions that address the water quality specifically. My question was about, how they looked at other methods to address the quality. And it sounds like they're going to do it through new plantings, which is, this is a relatively small increase in impervious cover. That's probably fine. But I wonder if staff, and it could be planning staff or our engineer, what their opinion is on that. I mean, I assume they're in agreement, but I'd like to hear it from them on the record at the public hearing, that how the applicant's proposing to address water quality, and are they in agreement with the methodology, and would they recommend that we impose a condition to require that those plantings be installed and maintained in good condition? So that's my question. But it was soliloquy, but then a question at the end.
Hailu, I'm going to let you start, and then I can opine afterwards.
Okay, thank you. So the applicant proposed to add additional trees, shrubs, and also during construction, they proposed to stabilize the disturbed area through temporary seeding while it is under construction. They are also proposed silt fencing around all the disturbed areas. So we believe all the trees they proposed is equivalent to the water quality criteria that is already on the property. So based on the water quality impact assessment they submit, they calculated how many trees, how many planters, how many coverage they added on the property. So based on that, we concluded that they also follow a state guideline to calculate the number of trees, and we believe that they meet the water quality requirements. I know there was a discussion before they submit the application, choosing whether to add trees or adding permanent stormwater management facilities. So based on our assessment, those additional trees they planted on the property, they have equivalent values as a permanent stormwater management facilities. And the DEQ recently approved that stormwater trees are considered as a permanent stormwater management facilities. So based on that, we recommend that the applicant already provided additional trees that will add the values to mitigate the water qualities in terms of reducing the velocity of runoff and infiltrating some of the nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, and also preventing erosion and sediment control. In addition to that, as soon as we approve this, we have a right-of-way manager we are working with. His name is Matt Brown. He also inspects the site routinely just to confirm they are in compliance with the water quality impact assessment or the approved plan. We also go out at the end to inspect all of these are implemented on the ground. So that is also a follow-up procedure for us at the end when they finish the construction of the deck.
Okay, thank you for that. I know I appreciate that, and that was kind of the explanation I wanted to hear. And I don't disagree that the plantings are suitable. I'm looking at the WQIA, and it looks like they're proposing it's the 1 river birch, the 2 dogwoods, and then 5 rhododendrons. And so that, at least based on the WQIA, that's what they're proposing. So would you recommend that we include that as a condition of any approval to ensure that occurs and that those are maintained in good condition?
I think that's appropriate to say. Like I said, we initially go out and inspect if these trees are planted properly. But as a follow-up, I think that's appropriate condition to put.
Thank you. I agree with that, and I would recommend whenever we get to that point that we impose such a condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner. Any additional questions, comments on this item? No? Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Fuller, did you want to follow up
I
on
had
that same question, please?
a draft for the commission for that condition. I'll be happy to share it when the time comes.
That sounds good. I drafted something too, so maybe we can compare notes.
Okay.
If there's no other discussion, I think we can move on to any changes to the motion. Jack, if you want to bring it up. So my proposal, maybe I can start, Mr. Fuller, would be, and see how you like this, Mr. Krasner, would be to add maybe another whereas after the first whereas that says, and whereas the applicant and property owner has committed to an RPA mitigation plan that proposes to add 1 overstory, 2 understory, 5 shrubs, and permanent and temporary ground cover. So recording the fact that they have committed to this. Is that what you're looking for? Are you looking
I'm looking for something more definite, like an actual condition, saying we are recommending, we approve this, right? This is not a recommendation, right? The planning commission's doing this?
No, this is an actual exception or approval.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah,
I would say
we're the
our
last
approval
one.
is conditioned on the installation of the plants identified on that WQIA, and that they be maintained in good condition. And we could, if we want, it depends how specific we want to be, but if any are, that would imply if any are diseased or die or are removed, that they be replaced in like kind. Something to that effect, just to, again, it sounds like actually the ordinance is telling us we must impose a condition. It's kind of, telling us we should do it, so I think we should do it. And I think that's the gist of it, however you want to word it, Mr. Fuller, that they install what they said they were going to do, they maintain it in good condition. If any are die or are removed, that they replace them with a similar planting.
So I have a suggestion then.
Okay.
So we could either add another whereas, or I would suggest maybe now therefore move. Planning Commission approve the requested exception munis application and the number listed, and the approval is conditioned on the plants identified in the WQA to be maintained, to stabilize, and that approval and restriction shall run with the land.
Okay, so you're referencing the WQIA. Yeah, as long as that document
Yes.
will live on with this approval, and someone in the future can, find that one is attached to the other. If there ever is a question about whether or not they're in compliance or not, then yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, so this would come after the now therefore I move that the planning commission, and what was the language that you suggested, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, I'll read it one more time. Just
Yeah, and I think if you can read slowly,
type it
so
in.
Yes,
Mr.
and
Trainer
we'll
can
you-
type.
Very
Yeah,
good. All
thank
right.
you.
All right, so after the now therefore at the end, after application munis reference, approval is conditioned. Right there, yeah. Condition is approval. Condition is, I'm sorry, approval is conditioned. There we go. Right there. It's not letting you type it? Okay.
I'm getting my computers mixed up. Sorry.
Wrong keyboard. Approval is conditioned on the plants identified in the WQA to be maintained to stabilize the area, and the approval and restrictions shall run with the land.
Something about the plantings, though. I think we need something in there that specifically references the installation of the plantings
Okay.
that are identified on the WQIA, because they're right on there, but we should be specific.
Approval is conditioned on the plantings identified on
In
the,
the RPA mitigation planting schedule. How about that? That's what it's titled on the sheet.
okay. RPA plantings,
Mitigation planting schedule.
mitigation planting.
Schedule. And that those plants be maintained in good condition.
that those plants be maintained in good condition.
Yeah.
So we can probably drop the stabilization, since we've got that. And then the approval and restrictions shall run with the land, yeah. So we'll read it one more time.
So I think you want to change it, Jack, maintained in good condition, period. The approval and restrictions shall run with the land. Is that,
I'm fine with that.
and I think approval is a capital A, this is a new sentence. I'm sorry.
No, the approval after the number.
Yeah, at the beginning of, yeah.
After, the first approval.
Ask a question about the language here. Or should we wait?
Go ahead, please.
Who determines the plants are maintained in good condition? Who answers that question? If somebody says they're not, who makes that decision?
I think it would be like a neighbor,
Well, I mean, the city engineer would be the one to go, whoever on
To
city staff
decide.
would go out and inspect if there was a complaint or if there was any question.
Okay. Did we have to define good condition?
I don't think so. I think,
Yeah, I think it's implied that they're alive and, relatively healthy. I mean, I think also the key is if they're ever removed, that condition's making it clear that they would have to be, replaced. So by saying they're in good condition, I think it's implied. I think
Okay.
it's okay.
Yeah, in this case, the city arborist would inspect it, and they would be able to determine, whether the vegetation, the trees are in good condition, generally speaking, based on their training. So,
can I ask?
My HOA has a site plan that has required plantings, so we have the same obligation, and it would be pretty much city staff that would be the enforcer on that.
Okay.
Can I ask for a couple more words just to smooth it out? Approval is conditioned on the installation of the plants.
okay.
Yeah, identified in the RPA mitigation planting schedule of the WQIA, and that those plants be maintained in good condition. Okay. All right, any other discussion?
One last question.
Go ahead.
Since this runs with the land, how would that affect the sale of the land? If somebody, this is a new guy question. Like if the current tenants sell the land, kids get old, they move out. Would this be a blocker for them selling the land? Would this prevent them from selling this in any way?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't think so.
but-
People like trees on their
The
properties.
the law, the rules apply regardless of who owns it. So we're just putting people on notice that, that they would be required to do that. So for example, if she sold the property, then next year, and then in 10 years, there's an issue, someone comes in to do something and the city says, wait a second, you're missing these plants. And they say, well, I never knew about that. The seller never told me anything about that. That doesn't apply to me. This is kind of saying, well, actually, it does apply to you, and it kind of gives the city a little more ammunition to say, to kind of refute anyone who might say in the future, well, I never knew about that, so therefore I don't have to do it, which isn't really a good defense most times anyway, but that's the reason for it, in my opinion. That's why I think it's helpful. I don't think it's going to hurt or not hurt. I mean, the property's in the RPA, whatever disclosures are required under Virginia law when you sell a property, which aren't that many. It's on buyer beware, I guess, as far as knowing what they're getting into by buying a property that has a number of additional restrictions on it, even, besides this.
I would just confirm what Commissioner Krasner stated. This entire property is in an RPA, so disturbing and removing that vegetation is already, addressed under that protection. So anyway, so they shouldn't be removing any of the vegetation and trees without permission. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what, Mr. Duncan, can you? Yeah, can we add, correct the typo and therefore, please, while we're in there? Thank you. Thank you for that contribution, Mr. Duncan. Any other, yep, Mr. Kravinsky.
It seems like a very acceptable addition, but before we vote on it, is there anything at this point that the homeowner wants to add to that addition, to comment on that addition that we just made?
I think we've closed the public hearing at this point, so I don't think we can invite the homeowner to speak on the motion at this point. Am I wrong about that? Mr. Fuller, can you give me a
No,
point of
this,
order?
I mean, yeah, you've closed the public hearing, and this is your motion at this
Yeah,
point,
this
your
is
action.
our motion as a
So
planning
only the
commission.
commissioners can,
But any commissioners who
Comment.
have, if you have particular questions about it, please raise them now.
No. I'm fine with it. I just, we made an addition to what was the original application.
This
Yeah.
is, the motion was drafted by our staff, not the applicant.
Okay.
Sorry, any additional discussion? Questions? Does somebody want to make the motion? Mr. Krasner?
So I had the most to say about it. I'm
Thank
happy to
you.
do it. And again, I'll just, well, before I make the motion, again, I'll just say, right, this is a relatively, in other jurisdictions, it's a relatively routine thing. We don't have as much area of RPA, so that probably explains why. Although we do have, a lot of areas that are also floodplain or coterminous with RPA, so a lot of folks who are in the floodplain, whether they know it or not, are also in the RPA. But we don't have a lot of properties that are, just in the RPA and maybe come across this on a regular basis. But it is, and what they're doing again is again a relatively routine thing, and how they propose to mitigate it, which is required under the ordinance, is also very reasonable. And the condition we added is really just memorializing what the WQIA that the applicant's consultant prepared said they were going to do. So we're just kind of putting everyone on the same page about what's expected. And so with that as a preamble, I will go ahead and make the motion. I can go back and pull it up here, and I'll have to read the new part, but, okay. So this is in, again, application number 202-4051.
4045.
I'm sorry, 40451, sorry. Requesting exception for development within the seaward portion of a resource protection area. Whereas, in accordance with Section 35-11 of City Code, Elizabeth Killingsworth, property owner of 312 Shadow Walk, has submitted a request for Planning Commission review and exception for an encroachment into the seaward portion of the resource protection area on her property for purposes of constructing a screen porch addition to her home. And whereas, after reviewing the submitted water quality impact assessment and applying the evaluation criteria for such applications included in Section 35-11 F3, the Planning Commission finds that this is a reasonable request for relief with minimal environmental disruption. Now, therefore, I move that the Planning Commission approve the requested exception and Munis application number 202-40451. Approval is conditioned on the installation of the plants identified in the RPA mitigation plantings schedule of the WQIA, and that those plants must be maintained in good condition. The approval and restrictions shall run with the land.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Ms. Friedlander with the second. Mr. Trainer, can you do a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Polinsky.
Aye.
Mr. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Krasner.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Ms. Friedlander.
Yes.
Mr. Kravinsky.
Yes.
And Ms. Coman.
Yes.
Thank you. The ayes have it. The motion passes.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for joining us remotely. Thank you, Bahailu, for your work on this. And to the applicant, have a good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
I think we are moving on to our minutes from our meeting of February 5th, 2025. I had one small change. Did anybody else have any other changes?
I had one, too. You probably got the same one on.
Was it the roll call vote?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Was it 6?
It was 6-0, yeah, I think. There was a reference to a roll call vote that was like blank to 0, and I think it was 6 because we had Mr. Krasner absent. Right there, at the bottom of the page. The motion passed 6-0. Yeah. Any other changes? Okay, if not, is there a motion to approve?
So moved?
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you. So that completes our action items tonight, and we are moving on to our work session items. And the first item on our agenda is the fiscal year 26 to 31 CIP. Welcome, Ms. Sabsi. Mr. Fuller, do you want to introduce the item?
Yes, Caitlin Sopsey is here as our CIP coordinator. She has a presentation, and City Manager Wyatt Shields is also here, and so they will be presenting tonight. Thank you.
Great, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. I think we're gonna, Jack, can we start with the staff report? Yeah. I just want to go over some of the staff report background and the motion. Welcome to the new commissioners. Good evening, everyone. I'm Caitlin Sabsi, CIP coordinator. I'm excited to be here tonight to present to you the proposed fiscal year 2026 through 2031 Capital Improvements Program, or CIP. We were here last in the fall when we first started CIP development with the Planning Commission, and we've been working hard on the next 6-year program since then, so we have a lot to share with you all. Last week, we finalized the proposed CIP document, which includes all the project sheets, all completed and active projects, all projected future project needs, and a 6-year budget to strategically fund and execute it all. That was provided to the Planning Commission on Friday, these little notebook or binders. In that format, it's presented to you. It's also available to the public on the website at the link shown here. Just really quick, the motion included in the staff report tonight is actually the Planning Commission's motion from last year for the fiscal year 25 CIP. I just included it as a framework as you develop your motion for next meeting. This version of the proposed CIP, the budget notebooks, and what's posted on the website right now, sort of works as a working draft as we present the proposed CIP, and the Planning Commission considers it and recommends it, and then it is presented to Council next month in March. There might be changes made that will be reflected in updated materials on the website, but for you all, for your notebooks, if there are any changes, we'll inform the Planning Commission of that for your awareness. The request tonight for the Planning Commission is to review the proposed CIP in your work session. I'm going to go through some slides in a minute to go over sort of an overview of the proposed CIP. Then staff will be back on March 5th for your public hearing and to seek recommendation of the CIP from the Planning Commission. As I mentioned, we were here last in November to kick off CIP development and request the Planning Commission's input on our priorities identified going into fiscal year 26 development. And there it is right there. The Planning Commission provided that input. This is a process that we implemented in the last few years of coming to the Planning Commission early in the fall before we present you with a basically fully developed CIP in the winter, so that we can collect your goals and priorities before we develop that budget, at which point it can be difficult to make changes, especially ones that have funding implications. I feel like this is too loud. Starting on line 140 of the staff report, I just provided some background. There's some background information provided on the CIP process and the role of the Planning Commission, which is required to annually consider and recommend the 6-year CIP provided here in section 6.19 of the city charter and section 17 of the city code. There's also some background information on the planning process and what qualifies as a capital project, which is defined as a new one-time project with a useful life of more than 5 years and costing $150,000 or more. I'm sorry, Jack, I'm kind of hopping all over the place here. On page 4, line 66, there's some changes we made to this year's CIP in order to improve organization and readability, which I will talk about in more detail. And then on page 5, there's some changes to the process this year that come from the budget guidance and financial policy. I think that's on line 116 maybe. And the fiscal year 26 financial policy that was adopted by council in November or December allowed for for staff to develop a long-range 6-year budget and strategic funding plan for the Affordable Housing Fund. I talked about this a little bit in the fall because we knew that that was in development. The Affordable Housing Fund is in the operating budget. It will stay in the operating budget. It will be adopted with the operating budget in the budget ordinance in May. But this new policy directed staff to present the Affordable Housing Fund budget, the new 6-year budget, concurrently with the CIP. So my colleague Brendan from Housing and Human Services will also present that to you tonight as well. Okay, getting into the slides. Thank you. The first slide, next slide, I guess, is just a CIP big picture overview. This year's 6-year total is shown here, $148 million. And the full CIP is now posted on the city website. That's also shown here. The general government and school fund totals $51 million. That's where public safety, public facilities and schools, recreation and parks, and the IT programs, they're all in the general school fund. In the transportation fund, the special transportation fund is where all the transportation program lives. That is $59 million, 6-year total. The sewer utility fund is $35 million, and the stormwater utility is $3 million. This year's total budget is more modest than recent years. It's about $40 million less than last year's 6-year total of $189 million. But that $148 million total does not include all of the existing 38 projects that staff is still working to deliver. And so while this year's budget is a little bit more conservative, we still have a lot going on in the CIP. The next slide is an overview specifically of the funding. On the left table, I have the 6-year total for the programs that I mentioned, totaling $148 million. On the right table, we have the total funding sources. I also have included the visual, the pie chart there, to show the total funding sources as well. The largest source is debt financing right now at $57 million for the 6-year total, but most of that is the future property yard, which was proposed for $30 million of debt financing in fiscal year 28. The second largest source is grants at $46 million, or 31% of our budget. We added the purple sliver this year for the stormwater and sewer funds. That is available fund balance that we're using towards implementing projects and programs in the 6-year program. Green is unfunded or to be determined. We usually try to fund that with future grants over the next 6 years. Blue on the bottom there is $9.9 million. I think that's capital reserve. And the yellow is other local funds that are pay-as-you-go. On the next slide, I have some fiscal year 25 accomplishments and completed projects. This slide, as highlighted here, we completed 14 projects in the CIP in fiscal year 25 so far. We have another 5 projects that are anticipated to be complete before the end of fiscal year 25 on June 30th. Including some of the projects that I highlighted here, WNOD trail crossings, the parklets. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the completed projects. We, next week on Monday at council, we're doing a CIP quarterly update. We did one of those in the fall with the Planning Commission as well. I don't know that I'll be back next week to present that to you all, but I can include it to the planning director as an attachment for you all, and he can provide you with that information. That has a lot more information about completed and active ongoing CIP projects. And a full list of completed projects is available on page 1-2 of the notebooks. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our priorities. I wrote about these in the staff report as well. Our staff priorities have been effective and realistic project delivery, infrastructure reinvestment, multimodal transportation, and affordable housing. Our focus this year was reinvesting in specifically infrastructure for facilities, utilities, and transportation. Multimodal projects really emphasizing walkability and bike infrastructure. We focused on aligning projects with our energy efficiency, equity, and comprehensive planning goals by adding new sections to each project sheet that highlight how projects conform with these priorities. We focused on affordable housing by implementing the new process that I mentioned, whereby a long-range strategic plan and 6-year budget was developed for the Affordable Housing Fund. And we focused on our priority of effective and realistic project delivery by providing detailed scopes, schedules, and budgets with all of our project sheets to ensure that the CIP workload we present aligns with our staff resources and our financial resources. This did result in some changes in project schedules and funding, primarily in the transportation program. And I'll go into that a little bit. It might influence how we make decisions in future CIPs as well, but we're trying to maintain the CIP delivery schedules that we commit to and just smooth out workload and capacity overall. Next slide. This is more just about the changes made this year, more changes. Overall, just a lot of changes to formatting and organization, making it easier to read and understand the CIP, or at least I hope that's what we accomplished. We added the sections to the project sheets for project benefits, project schedule, and project budget that I mentioned. We really tried to use the project sheets to tell the what, why, when, and how much for each project. What is the project? Why do we need it? When is it happening, and how much does it cost? We added the new checklist for comprehensive planning. There's one table on the bottom of the project sheets for comprehensive planning alignment with all of the comp plan chapters, and then there's a second table for the equity and sustainability alignment checklist, which is for which replaces our equity lens that used to be on the back of the project sheets in previous years. We added the 10-year outlook, which moves future projects in need of development sort of out of the 6-year plan. So we used to have on all of the project sheets and in the budget table, we had a column on the end that was the year 7 to 10 column, and we called that our 10-year outlook. We've removed that from the project sheets and the bigger funding tables, and we've moved that to a separate list called the 10-year outlook that's included in section 2 of the notebooks. The reason that we did that is because those projects really need more development. They need to be fully scoped, they need detailed estimates, they need schedules, and that was sometimes not happening with they were just living in that little column, and so we want to make sure that we really highlight what those projects are. The 10-year outlook list does include estimated costs, but those are definitely subject to change as we develop more detailed cost estimates. But the objective was for staff to be able to prioritize those projects and advance them in future CIP budgets. And also the Affordable Housing Fund that I mentioned, which we're going to talk about. The next slide, I think, is just more information on the comp plan alignment. The full checklist for the comp plan and the equity and sustainability checklist, those are provided in your notebooks in Appendix A and B in the very back. You can see the full list of questions that staff were asked to answer to evaluate each project to see which chapters of the comp plan their project met the goals and objectives of, and the same thing for both energy action plans, the government operations energy action plan and the community energy action plan. And I think the next slide is on the equity and sustainability checklist. So yeah, same thing so both of those full length lists of questions are provided so that you can see what they were asked to evaluate and how they were asked to assess each project. It's not listed in the actual documents, but we provided links to all staff for those comp plan chapters and for those energy action plans so that if staff were not familiar with the goals or the comp plan chapters, they were able to review that before they answered the questions. Again, we're just trying to make sure that our CIP aligns with the vision and the long-range strategic planning of the city and what's been adopted for that. This is definitely a process that we plan to continue refining over the next couple of years. This year was sort of, we got the format set up, and it's, kind of instilling a behavior change for staff that they are looking at projects this way for every single project. But in the future, we'll definitely make some improvements, especially to the equity questions while we're doing some Title VI overhaul right now that we've been doing for the last year. We'll coordinate those with this alignment checklist next year. The next slide is, program overviews. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the program areas and some more information. In the transportation program, I've provided for each of these areas just the 6-year total and the types of funding that are proposed for appropriation. The highlighted projects for in transportation, paving along Broad in Washington, that's the SGR paving. We have a grant that's currently pending to fund some paving along Broad in Washington. Again, trying to focus on, infrastructure investment and maintaining capital infrastructure. The bike routes, so 2 priority bike routes are included in the 6-year plan. The first one is the east-west connection, which is already active with some design funded in fiscal year '25. This year's CIP includes funding in fiscal year '26 to complete the design, and then some funding in fiscal year '27 for the construction of that route. The second route that's included is West Street, and that's included in fiscal years '28 and '29. South Washington bus stop expansion hasn't changed since last year. That's still included and will start this year. One big change that we made in transportation is the traffic signal infrastructure investment project that we've added as a new project sheet. And what we plan to do is, staff is working on developing a master plan for mast arm and traffic signal infrastructure replacement and a schedule for all of that. What we're proposing to do is actually deallocate and defer some of the current projects that we have for intersection improvements in the 6 years and actually redirect all of that local funding to this traffic signal infrastructure investment program, because some of the intersection projects that we've had funded with grants in the past have taken us a really long time to do. It's taking us like 4 or 5 years to do a traffic signal. We feel that if we use the local funds and we're within this new project, that we'll be able to execute those projects faster and probably with less resources than it takes to administer a grant. So that's one thing that we're still working on developing, but we have proposed that as a new project this year. And overall, just, deferring those projects or deallocating to smooth out our local funding and also project delivery. In the next program, we have facilities and schools. We also made, Jack, are you going to the next slide? We also made some changes in the government facilities area this year. We added some new facilities projects. There are 3 proposed, 1 in '26, 1 in '27, and 1 in '28. That's one of when we implemented the new project sheet and asked, and said we're going to have detailed schedules and estimates for each of these projects, that was harder to do for some projects than others, because some projects, including general government facility reinvestment, we had previously approached as sort of a program where we just had a pot of money where we put money in every year and then we use that money to reinvest in our facilities. Instead, we are taking a new approach of having discrete projects that are proposed and introduced, and we're using that same money that was going into that pot to go to those discrete projects every year. We feel like there will be better transparency, and also we'll be able to deliver better data as far as, just quantitative, like project delivery and status of those projects is going to be a lot easier to talk about, and hopefully better delivery outcomes as well. The property yard is still included in the facilities 6-year plan that for $30 million. We did move out the construction funds. So it was $30 million last year for fiscal year '28. We moved out the construction funds to fiscal year '29 in this year's plan. So it's $3 million in '28 and $27 million in '29. That really is all pending the outcome of the ULI technical assistance panel that we just had in January. We don't have the full recommendations or the full report from that, but we know that there will be recommendations that will impact how we build a new property yard. So that project is still included, but is subject to change as well. Also, another project added this year was the Mary Ellen Henderson roof replacement. That is, they want to replace the roof in order to install rooftop solar for Mary Ellen Henderson. That is included for funding in fiscal year '28 or '29, I believe. City Hall rooftop is also still included in, I think, over a couple of years. Starting in fiscal year '26, though, Aurora House has been the public building that's been identified that is viable and is included for, I think, fiscal year '28 and '29. And then after that was the community center. In the sewer and stormwater program, a couple of positive developments since last year in this program that I'm excited to share. Last year, we introduced the Nutrient Credit Purchase Project, which is, every time I talk about nutrient credits, I really have to check my notes, because the Nutrient Credit Purchase is a project that we proposed last year for funding in fiscal year '28 in order to offset the city's share of pollutants in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So it was $2.2 million in fiscal year '28 that we needed to come up with to buy the nutrients to offset our pollutants, to be in compliance with, state and federal regulations. It was required. Since last year, that CIP was adopted, but since last year, we've now funded it partially in fiscal year '25 with a SLAF grant, which is through the state. It's the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, is what SLAF stands for. We applied for $640,000 in fiscal year '25. We just received authorization 2 weeks ago that we received that. So now we have changed the plan from, purchasing the $2.2 million in sometime before fiscal year '28 to applying for that SLAF grant every year for the next 4 years and offsetting the cost to us by 50%, because that's a 50/50 matching grant program. We also applied in the last year for federal funds in the amount of $3 million toward the flow equalization basin cost, which is $10 million, and that project is to install an additional capacity chamber to address peak flow rates. That's actually what the image on the screen there is. And it does cost $10 million. It is still included in the CIP budget for $10 million of debt financing, because if we don't get the $3 million, we still have to issue $10 million of debt. We have to be able to do that, and so it has to be in the adopted budget. That is, the $3 million request is it's a federal request for a congressional appropriation. So we have no idea what the outcome of that will be right now. But I just wanted to share that that was something that we previously added. Also in the stormwater program, Roberts Park was added as a new stormwater project in this year's budget for in fiscal year '28 and '29, as well as a couple other new projects that were added to the 10-year outlook for future consideration. The next slide is a couple other general government or general fund programs, public safety, IT, and parks. The biggest, I think the most notable change this year is for Fire Station number 6. We have an agreement with Arlington County for the maintenance and capital maintenance of that building, capital improvements. And that agreement usually requires us to pay $250,000 a year. That agreement is it's being revised right now, and then in the new agreement, it's proposed those costs would go up significantly, including a $5 million roof replacement for the entire fire station in fiscal year '31. So costs for the fire station went up a lot. Those are included in the 6-year budget, but they'll look different, and that's why. Another change we made was for Park Master Plan implementation in fiscal years '28 and 2031, I believe. We were drawing down the capital reserves a little bit more conservatively this year. Those are not included for funding right now, but staff will keep working to identify funding for those projects. All right, now I think I'm ready to turn it over to Brendan Woodley, Housing Specialist. He's going to provide an overview of the Affordable Housing Fund 6-year budget. As I mentioned, this is consistent with the updated financial policies for the city. It makes sense for us to consider the affordable housing alongside the CIP as we start to draw down that large $20 million of capital reserves that we started doing in the last couple of years, and consider the housing needs that we may face in the near future. So while the Planning Commission doesn't have any legal authority over the adoption or recommendation of the Affordable Housing Fund because it's in the operating budget, we just wanted to make sure that we share the changes to this so that we knew it would be of interest to you all and the public. So I'm going to turn it over to Brendan.
Great, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Caitlin, thank you, members of the Planning Commission. Nice to see you guys again. As you guys may or may not know, Brendan Woodley, Housing and Human Services. I typically on a normal year, I run the Affordable Housing Fund with my colleagues in Housing Human Services. But today, I'm going to share with you an exciting change to that Affordable Housing Fund process, one that I think members of the Planning Commission have been interested in for a while, and we get to kind of share it with you. So as Caitlin mentioned, based on the guidance from City Council, updated fiscal policies in November 2024, the Affordable Housing Fund will now track a 6-year spend plan. In comparison, previously, the Affordable Housing Fund was presented in the operating budget separate from department budgets. Now, while the Affordable Housing Fund is still technically operating funds, as opposed to capital funds, of course, it will be presented alongside and similar to the CIP, with both a 6-year outlook and a discretionary breakout of sources and uses. So similarly, rather than the Planning Commission providing input like they would with the CIP, the Housing Commission is actually the governing body that comments on these fiscal allocations. The version you have before you today is the unconstrained version of that budget, and this part of the presentation is only really for informational purposes for you guys to just be aware of what's happening with affordable housing on the other side here. So while now the timing actually happens to work out really nicely, as the changes to the Affordable Housing Fund were actually identified in the, as some of you may recognize, the Affordable Living Policy Update that we're currently in the process of working on. There's actually today we were supposed to meet with the Affordable Housing Policy, but we had to push it back a little bit. Don't worry, we will get it to you guys. You will get an opportunity to have a conversation about it. It's very exciting. It's a very big update, but what we're talking about today is actually part of those updates. So we're actually kind of doing a lot of that work simultaneously as actually putting out this Affordable Living Policy Update. So for a quick overview of the sources for what we've prepared here in this budget, most of the fiscal year 26 is funded using existing dollars. So that includes $1.2 million in typically grant funding. So, and we can talk a little bit about this on the next slide, but grant funding for HUD grant funds, including CDBG and home funds, which is a yearly allocation that the city gets that we use for programs in the city for housing, as well as a fund allocation by Congressman Don Beyer that we received. Well, we are currently in the process of applying for, and hopefully we get good news soon. We have $400,000 from existing accounts. That's basically funds that are currently sitting in the Affordable Housing Fund that haven't specifically been allocated, and then another $500,000, that's the blue line you see up here, from local funds. So that's what we expect our yearly allocation of affordable housing funds to be moving forward without any changes. So moving forward to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the existing projects and how some of them might be changing. In years prior, the Affordable Housing Fund focused on a variety of funding sources and uses to support affordable housing. Many of these uses have ongoing programs and existing funding allocations, and we kind of operate them and allocate them on a yearly basis. So, for example, you see these orange lines, those home and CDBG funds that I spoke of. The use of these funds is typically determined by the Housing Commission, authorized by the council, and typically they're used for things like rent subsidies, for at-risk populations, and for capital improvements for local housing organizations that apply for it using through the Housing Commission. We have another reoccurring project or program, the CCAU, the City Committed Affordable Unit Program, which is our city version of the voucher program. So that's we take market rate properties and we subsidize those rents so that people at lower AMIs can get it, which is a fantastic opportunity for the city to kind of address an existing and growing need in the city, especially since the pandemic. So in this allocation, we actually have that program growing on a yearly basis using existing grant funds, existing affordable housing funds that we have, and that as we move forward, we will eventually develop that into a fully fledged self-sustaining program. And then we have a development fund, which is primarily focused on Virginia Village. You guys might be familiar with it, but it's a neighborhood a couple blocks away across from the Quinn project, where that's coming in. We have a number of properties over there, and what we are looking at is what are some of our development opportunities. We had a change of developers last year, so as we are evaluating next steps for that project, we are budgeting out funds for that program to continue for years to come, as well as usage of the rental income from those properties as well. And then last but not least on this page, we have a housing preservation fund. So this fund is designed for the use of identifying methods of maintaining and offsetting expiring affordable housing covenants in the city. That's a mouthful, but the general idea here is a lot of our older covenants are expiring, and we are actively working and thinking through ways to make sure that they are either extended or finding ways to offset them in some other location in the city. So moving forward, we'll talk a little bit about some of our new projects, and I'll pass it back to Caitlin. So a couple new projects here. We are kind of working on those as we speak. We have a housing needs assessment that was also identified in the affordable living policy. This will cover things such as the unhoused population, all the way up to our actual homeownership needs in the city. It'll help give us a more granular understanding of the data needed for that. We budgeted about $100,000 from existing funds. And then we have two newer projects that we will not be commencing in this year. And as we evaluate the need for those programs over the next fiscal year, we will develop a more comprehensive program and get a better sense of those staffing needs. So one is for the homeownership program. So it's dedicating funds to develop and pilot homeownership programs like a renovation assistance program, especially for seniors, and a rent-to-own program that could serve to help households out with area median incomes greater than 60% AMI. And then we have a sponsorship program for affordable housing, and that's what you would think is capital contributions to existing market rate developments. Some of them might be aging properties that might need upgrades, low interest loans, that sort of thing, to help them for affordable housing concessions, but basically to provide a loan or grant service to help them make capital contributions and maintain lower rents. So that is that. I can pass it back to Caitlin, and
Thanks.
yeah.
I think the last slide, yeah, we'll stay up here for questions or discussion. But this last slide is just our schedule. Tonight, we're here for the work session to review the proposed CIP. In 2 weeks, on March 5th, we will be back for the public hearing and recommendation. March 24th, the city manager presents his proposed budget operating school board operating and CIP budget to City Council. That sort of kicks off the budget approval process. We'll have some meetings in April, probably work sessions with council for that. And then May 12th is when we anticipate fiscal year 26 budget adoption. If there's any questions after tonight or that we can't answer tonight, feel free to reach out to me. And thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both for that terrific presentation. I know we are all wishing Mr. Hyra could be with us tonight.
He was with us in spirit, I would say.
Yeah, well, he was here in spirit. Yeah, and this may not be exactly what he envisioned and what he advocated for a long time, but I think it is some meaningful progress, so we appreciate it. And I'll make sure he is aware of his impact. Any thoughts? I think I'll just go ahead and open it up to planning commissioners for any thoughts, questions. Anybody want to begin? Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Just a couple of quickies. So Caitlin, the school CIP request that the superintendent's going to file, is that incorporated in this document that you gave us here?
As far as I'm aware, only the CIP, the capital projects that are included in that. So not the school board like operating fund request.
No, but
Yeah.
I mean, if I want to ask the question, what CIP work are we doing for the school system with the school system? That should be in this document here.
Yeah, and that would all be in the facilities and schools section, and the projects would say schools on the project sponsor in the right-hand corner.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that there wasn't something in addition to that.
Yeah.
A couple other quickie questions. Back towards the back, there's the 10-year priority or 10-year items that are just sort of listed there. A couple of them caught my eye. The Cherry Hill work is described as something that's a priority. I'm just wondering, how the determination was made to put items on that list as opposed to the somewhat more urgent list? I mean, 10 years, or does it in fact mean that? Does it really mean we're going to wait 10 years to keep Cherry Hill, from coming apart?
Right. So the 10-year outlook, so Cherry Hill Foundation is already in progress right now. So that was like the number one priority, was the foundation work that needed to be done at the farmhouse. This project is the Cherry Hill, the farmhouse HVAC and roof replacement. We applied this past year for a grant from the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. We didn't get it, unfortunately. I think we noted it as a priority on this list so that we can continue to keep that on our list for future budget amendment appropriations or other funding opportunities, other grant opportunities that we could apply for, to ensure that we do get it funded. I've talked with facilities management staff, and right now, it's acceptable. It's just not great. And if it's no longer acceptable, then we would have to identify the funding in our general fund budget. Like we would just have to find it. So that's why it's marked as a priority. I also, when we put this list together, I did mark a couple of those projects as priority that with staff input, because some of those were actually included in the 6-year budget previously. I didn't take them from the 10-year column, but they were included previously in the 6-year budget. They just still really need like project scoping and like a detailed project development and so that's what our staff identified as like, these are our priorities in the next year. We're hoping for input from the public and from Planning Commission and Council on what their priorities are so that we can sort of have our marching orders for over the next year. We're going to develop these select projects to be able to advance them and include them in next year's capital plan.
Okay. So as it relates to Cherry Hill in particular, the foundation work you say is underway and will be.
It's not in construction, it's, but it's active, it's ongoing.
They're
Yeah.
measuring the pace at which the building is needing to be tended to, as I understand. And so if they judge that the pace needs to step up, there would be a opportunity to address that more pressing need, separate from the other work that, as you said, shows up in the 10-year plan, because that's going to have to be funded through means yet to be determined.
Correct.
Okay, 2 other quick questions. The pace at which the North Washington, whatever we're calling it now, it's not the Great Streets program on the book here, it's something different, is
Multimodal.
There you go, thank you, Tim. This is your question, Tim, I thought. But the work, on North Washington is listed, I think, as a FY28 priority. Can we have a discussion about, is there anything we can do to speed that up, or any part of it which we can speed up? I'm speaking specifically of the traffic signal at Gresham Place, as you well know. So that's one question. And finally, maybe this shows up in this year's budget that the manager will present, but the impasse at Betos is my other hobby horse, the streetscape agreement that, I thought was settled and work would be underway by now. Is that going to show up in this year's budget as opposed to the CIP?
Betos?
Yeah.
I believe Betos is funded. I don't have any funding requests for Betos right now. It is funded, it is delayed. It was supposed to be, I think, in construction a while ago, and now the new anticipated date I have, I think, is March or April. It would be hard to, I think we've reached an agreement, with the property owner, and we have a design, like, we're ready to go. I think right now it's really just the temperature for the concrete and asphalt work. So I think that's all we're waiting on for Betos.
Okay.
For North Washington, multimodal, so that is one of the projects that we deferred in transportation that I mentioned earlier. And that project is actually, it was scheduled previously to start in fiscal year 26 and be, worked on over the next few years. We don't have staff resource. It's a $22.5 million project. It's a mega project. We have a couple other mega projects already in the pipeline. We don't have the resources for it. So we've been talking with MBTA about, deferring that to fiscal year '28. We've also been talking about finding a solution before fiscal year '28 for Gresham. That's something that we could consider in the traffic signal infrastructure program. I know that we've had some ongoing discussions with Arlington County about that traffic signal. That's an item that is still in development, but definitely actively in development and ongoing, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, it's good to get that on the record. I would like for us to discuss that further as we proceed. A couple other things, but I'll leave it at that for now, I think. Thank you very much. This is a good document. I tried to run my eyes past every page quickly just to get the general drift. I'll take a deeper dive later on. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, first of all, thank you for your report. I have just some clarifying questions for the most part. First one has to do with the funding source, the commercial and industrial equivalent. I have a feeling you've described this in the past and I've just forgotten. But since we don't have a C&IE tax, where are those funds actually coming from? Are they just coming from the general fund or?
From the tax rate,
I'm sorry?
right? From the tax rate. Maybe Wyatt should answer. So we have a CIE, we have a C&IE, we don't, because we don't have a C&I. So C&I is a tax that's commercial and industrial tax. We have a C&I equivalent, and I believe that comes out of the tax, yeah.
It does. It comes out of regular tax revenues, but it allows us to access the NVTA 30% money, which Ms. Hopsey does have programmed in for many of the transportation improvements as part of the CIP.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't used to seeing on the pie chart that has revenue sources, something that's identified by that label. Next question I had is on page 2-7. It's talking about $30 million for street grid realignment. I was just curious if you could elaborate on a little bit more on what that is.
That's a project that was previously in the Gordon Road Triangle POA project sheet, I want to say. So like I said, this year we're trying to get away from those sort of program sheets. We had a lot of program sheets in transportation where we had these big transportation programs that were based on planning opportunity areas and small area plans, but they had a bunch of different projects in there. So it made it sort of hard to track what was where. That was part of the, it was a recommended future project to extend Birch on one side of Route 7 to the other. So it would
Right.
cut through the Buyer property there and connect to Gordon Road, and just as an additional access point. We haven't, I don't know if that estimate is accurate, the one that's included there, the $30 million. It could be double that. I have no idea. That's not a project that we really developed. It is something that was discussed in the ULI TAP,
Yep.
Gordon Road.
Yeah, I was there for that. Yeah.
Conversation, yeah.
Okay, yeah, that helps just to identify.
So we're not recommending it for funding right now, but it is a project that was previously in the CIP, and so we're keeping it in there.
Okay. I don't know, just a suggestion, you might want to just footnote that and say that's part of the Gordon Road Triangle effort, but yes, your explanation makes good sense. On page 2-9, we're talking about, down at the bottom, talking about the debt limit. I think that the $642 million that's there, that must be the 10% of the total assessed value of a city real estate. Just the wording on this, you might want to just look at it, because
2-9, Wyatt says that's correct, but the debt limit.
Because I think our total assessed value is $6 billion, and so 10% would be that $642 million. I think that's what you're trying to say there. You might want to just look at the wording and clarify that.
Okay. I can look at that. That's the finance department writes that for us, but I will ask about it.
Yeah. Question on one of the programs, on 5-2, It's the public facilities and schools. Let's see. Oh, this is regarding the fleet, the city's fleet. So this would be the city's vehicles, right?
Yes.
I was just curious, some of those are going to be electric vehicles, I presume, right?
Yes.
So I was just curious, at the bottom there on your equity and sustainability alignment, I don't know, you might want to click off the
Yeah.
government energy action plan there.
That's a good point. This project sheet specifically is another one of those program areas for fleet replacement and reinvestment. The EV fleet and chargers grant that we got a couple years is not included in this.
Yeah.
We do have some electric or and at least hybrid fleet in this group. So yeah, that's probably a good point.
Well, in past years, I know we didn't have an overall plan, so just seeing it the way it is now in the CIP, I think that's good. So, the next one is on 5-5, and that's the City Hall emergency power reconfiguration. Would you happen to know whether the backup generator that they're talking about, is that like a gas generator or fossil fuel generator?
Do you know about that generator? I don't know. I'd have to get back to you. Yeah.
I realize I'm getting into the weeds here, so I apologize for that. My real question was, I'm assuming it is probably natural gas as a backup generator, in which case it's not clear to me that it really helps the government energy action plan, which is kind of highlighted down there, so
Okay.
you might want to check that out. And thank you, Mr. Duncan, for raising the question on the ultimate solution for Gresham Place, which is the multimodal plan. But what I was curious about is, I know the city has said that it's working on an interim proposal, or interim solution for that. And I was just wondering if that would be funded through the Transportation Traffic Signals and Intersections Program. And again, yeah, I don't expect that you would know that here, but
Yeah, it's possible. That's still sort of in development, but I can provide you more information.
yeah, I'll leave that
Yeah.
just as a question. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that there's this program that would put something like this into a identified program. But it seems like it's kind of more related to the Smart Cities grant. And I know that was being discussed as a possible interim solution for getting some type of a signal capability back at the Gresham intersection. I think I only had one more. Nope, I think you answered that one. That's all I have. Thank you. Again, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Friedlander.
Thank you. I thank you for putting this together. Again, I like the new kind of easy format. The one thing I do miss is seeing the individual project line items and kind of when they're targeted to start and when those funds are going to be released for that, or at least targeted, to kind of have an idea of when projects are coming up and going to come online, or if they're going to get bumped, right? And so I found that helpful from last year's CIP presentation and in all the backup. But I did have some questions about some of the projects that are still flagged as ongoing, like Fellows Property Park, but it doesn't show up, the funding doesn't show up, or it doesn't appear to show up on this plan. And I'm looking at last year's plan, which is the 2025, and it's funds that were earmarked for for fiscal year 26, but they're not showing up here. So there were a few projects that kind of fall into that bucket, so I was curious what happened to those.
Yeah, so the Fellows Property funds were appropriated in fiscal year '25 through a budget amendment.
Okay.
So that's why there's no project sheet for fellows, because we don't plan to appropriate any funds in fiscal year '26 or a future one. That is a hard thing to track, though, when we have those like mid-year budget amendments, where it's good that we're funding things or advancing things, but it is sort of hard to track when you look at this. It will be on the quarterly CIP updates. It's included in there, and those updates are usually listed in the notes. It'll say it was funded, the $1.2 million was funded, in this month, so, yeah.
That's great to know. So does that also apply to, say, for example, the acquisition of open space budget that was in last year's as well, that was kind of allocated?
Yeah,
out?
acquisition of open space is in the 10-year outlook.
Okay.
So it is still a project technically adopted in our CIP, that will be included in our adopted CIP. But we did remove the project sheet and include it as a 10-year outlook project, or like a future project. That also will probably be funded, through some sort of budget amendment or other opportunity that comes along.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the same for the projections for the Lincoln Avenue roadbed reconstruction. Is that included in the funding for the greening of Lincoln?
Yeah, so we advanced that and moved it around in a budget amendment in fiscal year '25 as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't have the time to kind of go through
Yeah.
all the weeds and figure out like where,
Yeah.
if stuff was already approved. And then the pending or anticipated credit for the geothermal from the
At
community
community
center
center.
HVAC, that, I didn't see that in the projection. So, but I just want to make sure, like, we're still going for that credit in '28 or '27.
That's the plan as far as I know. I think we're unsure of that outcome as well.
I think there's some question whether those grants are still coming through with all of the confusion at the federal level.
The funding for the community center HVAC, the geothermal, is appropriated. It's funded, it's in construction right now, it's still on track to be completed before June. So no question about those funds. The credits, we're not sure. I thought it was still included. Where was it? It was not included in the project sheet?
I just heard the mayor mention a comment that,
okay.
that there might be some risk to the geothermal, the funding that would come from the federal government.
Tax credit,
Yeah.
yeah, and so maybe that's why it was pulled out, but if it still stays on the radar to still apply for it, I mean, it's hard to know what's going to go through and what's not.
Right. I did include the tax credits for rooftop solar in
Yeah, I
that
saw
project
that.
sheet. So
I
like,
saw that.
as far as I know, we're still including it. We're just not sure that we're really counting on it.
That's fair.
Right.
Yeah.
That is fair. And I think you hit one of my other questions too, Mr. Stevens, so I appreciate that about the EVs for the fleet. I think that is it. Thank you for everything that you put into this. As always, that's very comprehensive, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Kaminsky.
First of all, thanks. This is a great report for a new guy, just being able to get through it. I was able to do it. The one comment I would suggest is, as a new guy, some of the acronyms, you might want an acronym appendix at the end. SGR, NVTA. I got it eventually, but they didn't jump out at me. I just want to follow up. So the tax credits from the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, those grants, have we mapped all of the grants that are attached, these projects that are attached to grants that we think may be vulnerable at this point? Or I noticed, so you have the rooftop solar, and I think you just mentioned the MEH rooftop solar. Are those are there other projects in here that may be vulnerable from, it's, I think it's 31% of this budget is from grants. And it seems like there's an awful lot of confusion right now with the grant process and clawing things back. Are you tracking, have you mapped where some of these projects could be vulnerable? And also to state grants that may be funded through federal block grants. Have you been able to map any vulnerabilities?
So to answer your question, I've been doing my best to track everything. It's a lot to track, and it's hard. Things are changing and developing really quickly. As far as the projects that are tied to the tax credits, those were all funded with ARPA, which was a federal grant that we received. That was the American Rescue Plan Act. I don't think any of them are tied to infrastructure, the IIJA grant. So that's why I really don't know what the outcome of the tax credits will be for the ARPA-funded projects. As far as our grants, I did mention that 31% of it is funded by grants. Of that, or 46 million, of that 46 million, 26% of that is federal money. So the rest of it is state and regional grants. MVTA is the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. Definitely will include a glossary of acronyms. So we're lucky in Northern Virginia. We have a lot of local, regional, and state grants as well. I don't know yet what's going to happen. I have had promising information from VDOT because a lot of our federal transportation grants come through VDOT. So we do administer them as federal grants. Anything that is federal money, we identify it as federal money, and a lot of that comes through VDOT. I've had promising news from VDOT. That was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure what you can do about it.
Yeah, same.
But other than to continue to monitor. The only other thing, a very minor thing to consider, as a new guy reading over this, on chartology, when I see green on a chart, I just assume it's good to go and like on track. So it was actually the unfunded was green. So you might want to change that to red or something like that. Just mostly when you see green on a chart, it means it's good.
I agree. We have some weird colors on the charts. I think they're for accessibility reasons, because I think if we tried to print red with black text, it would be very difficult to read. But
Got it.
yeah.
Okay. That's all I have. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Mr. Polinsky?
Just two questions. One, the stuff that Mr. Stevenson called out earlier about the street aligning, possible street aligning based on Birch in the property yard totals about 60 million. Do we know, and to be fair, like that's relatively non-specific. Like we don't yet know what it's going to be. Do we have a prioritization list of what comes out if those end up costing significantly more, or what would come in if it costs significantly less?
No, not a concrete list that I could provide. I will say that the street grid realignment was always proposed as an unfunded project, so we never did identify any funding for that project. It was always a long-term future plan. Property yard or Gordon Road redevelopment was to be funded with debt. So if we debt finance a project, that's a whole different ballgame. It will affect our local funds and our budget in some way. It has implications to that, but it wouldn't necessarily be, reallocating grant funds or other.
So since it's debt, we don't have it. If it ends up being more, it becomes a question of, do we want to take out that debt? Not, do we have to cut
Correct.
something else?
Yeah, and it goes back to that section two, financial policy and status sections after the funding tables in section 2 that talk about our debt capacity and debt limits and all of that.
Okay. And second question, was around the paving, specific to the Broad and Washington paving. Does all paving and infrastructure work, maintenance, upkeep of roads or pathways or things, does it go in the CIP, or is there regular DPW has standard repaving timelines?
Yeah,
Basically, if I
both.
don't see it in here, does it not happen?
No, it's in both, and there's probably a lot more of it happening in the Public Works operating budget. We do, try to get as many funding opportunities as we can to supplement our paving program and budget. The SGR one, that's State of Good Repair, that's a federal grant program, so we'll see. That was just so VDOT does evaluations or assessments of our pavement every year, and they tell us based on their numbers what condition pavement they would fund for us to repave. So if we can take that opportunity to get those funds to do repaving, we do. It's always on primary extensions, which is Route 7, Route 29, and Hillwood Avenue, I think. There might be one more. But there's also a lot of paving in the operating budget, in the Public Works budget, and we are, part of the reason why the CIP has been a little bit more conservative this year is because we're trying to actually fund more infrastructure investments in the operating budget.
Okay. Thanks. Can I ask a question about the affordable housing? I don't know if we're talking about that right now, but
Sure,
I had a question.
I'm here. Let's
Okay.
do it.
So I'm curious, like, with all the new buildings, it feels like a lot of the new buildings that have been going up recently have been fueling a lot of the opportunity for affordable housing. Without major new buildings currently in construction, with Founders Row 2 being finished and Broad Washington being finished, well, Founders Row 2 mostly being finished, and the national political climate, let's call it that. Like, how are we looking at, is there anything we're doing to increase affordable housing supply? You went through, sounded very knowledgeably. I'm just not as knowledgeable about it. I'm just curious, like, what we're doing in terms of affordable housing opportunities with what appear to be some headwinds in that particular situation.
Sure. So I think, and it'll be valuable when we actually talk about it, but affordable housing in general is probably benefits from a multi-pronged approach. And that's actually something we did a lot of consideration for in the affordable living policy document that we're in the process of developing. And again, it'll be here in a couple weeks. And the idea is it's probably not just one thing. It's a multitude. It's accessory dwelling units. It is easing the zoning code. It is local subsidies. There's a lot of things that can be done. And of course, it is your kind of more standard accessory affordable dwelling units, concessions from developers, which is kind of our bread and butter here in the city. So I think the idea here is to kind of like, even with the political climate, I don't think it really impacts a lot of the things that we look at in terms of trying to move the needle on affordable housing. But it's a good chance to give a plug. Housing Human Services is actually creating an affordable living dashboard, another function of the affordable living policy that we're doing. And it'll give a lot of great information on some of the initiatives, some of the ways that we track, and some of the ways that we want to try to improve affordable housing in the city and in the long term as well. So I'll absolutely share it with you guys once we have a proper rollout of that dashboard.
Got it. That'd be great. And secondarily, like, is there anything that includes the fields in any of these conversations? I don't remember exactly what timeline the exception there expires in terms of their requirements. Like, if they go, I think it's 5 or 6 years or something like that. Is there anything we're doing there? Is it less than that?
We are absolutely tracking the fields, watching it very closely. I don't think we have a dollar amount set to the fields, but it is something that we're very keen on, and we're doing a lot of kind of research on the back end to make sure that we are addressing it comprehensively.
Can you remind us of the year that those expire? It's 2027, is that right?
2027 at the end of the year, 2027, and then they have a sunset period of another 3 years. So 2030 is when there will no longer be affordable units required, meaning people that are living there, they stay affordable, but after 2027, there's no longer a requirement to keep those units affordable. The ones that move, those units can be turned over at
When they
market
turn
rate.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing, just sorry to jump in.
No, that's, yeah, that's
That
great.
could be addressed through the Housing Preservation Fund, the last thing in your list here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
Mr. Krasner? Any questions?
I don't have too much, but I'll ask my pet projects questions I ask every year. I think Mr. Duncan stole my thunder on one of them. The Betos pole, that thing lives on and never wants to go away. I don't know, we should go there with a chainsaw tomorrow and take it down. What's the delay? I apologize, you said it and I missed the beginning about why that still lives on. It's like the pole that cannot come down and block, and continues to block the
Oh,
sidewalk.
the poll specifically?
Yeah.
I don't know about the poll specifically.
Well, I know
I can try to get an answer to you.
Well, the whole project, I mean, to get,
Yeah.
to remove it, I know there was a dispute about getting an easement, and then I thought we worked that out. and
My
then-
understanding is the dispute is solved. There's an
Right.
agreement, there's a
Right.
way forward. We're just now waiting for the temperatures to rise a little bit. That's my understanding.
Really? So it may actually,
That's it, yeah.
so it may be gone this year, you're telling me?
Next week.
All right, well, we'll see, we'll see. I mean, as you know, it's one of my pet issues is poles in the middle of sidewalks. That's the most egregious. We have many bad ones.
Lincoln Avenue resident.
We have, Lincoln Avenue's full of them, but we have, I mean, that's near my house, but I'm thinking, but there's a lot more pedestrians on Broad Street, so. I was so excited when I heard we finally were doing that, but that was like 7 years ago, so. Seriously, I don't know, when did that first start? I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but when did that first start? Like, the initiative to remove it? It's been a problem forever, but the initiative to remove it was like pre-COVID. Anyhow, if it comes down this year, that'll be fantastic. The other project, which is closer to home, the stormwater project, which came out of the Stormwater Task Force, the Upper Lincoln. I was all excited because I saw a bunch of activity there. They dug up the street. I think they must have just been moving utilities. They then patched the street, and then it's been crickets. So what's going on with that?
Upper Lincoln,
The uppermost part of Lincoln, the
Yeah.
stormwater project?
it's, I don't remember off the top of my head. I just did that quarterly update earlier this week,
Yeah.
today. I had a status for it. I thought it was complete, in construction. No? Okay.
There
I'll
was
get-
people dug up the street. I think they must have been moving gas lines or something.
Okay.
And then they
It might
finished
be
that.
coordination with Washington Gas or
Yeah.
Dominion
Then
that
they
we're
finished
waiting
that, and then-
on.
Yeah, so like that's
Yeah.
done. Maybe there are more utilities that need to move, but,
Utilities could definitely be the culprit. I will let you know.
okay.
Yeah.
And then in the current CIP, the missing sidewalk link project, is there any way to get information about, do we have a list of the missing links? I know it talks about some guidance about things we might target or prioritize, but is there a list of current missing links? I just didn't see that in there.
Yes. There's a really comprehensive memo that staff did pretty recently, I want to say in the fall or winter, that was provided to CACT, that listed all of the missing links that we're currently planning or working on actively. It is set up to be sort of a program similar to neighborhood traffic calming, where you can request neighborhood missing links to be added to that list if you, as a resident. But I don't have that list provided it for in the CIP.
Okay.
It's been to council, it's been to CACT. I assume it has not been to planning commission, but there is a
I
list.
haven't seen it, unless other people know about it. Is it online?
I've seen it. The CACT reviewed it. I'm sure we could, if you could dig it up,
Yeah.
or maybe, if Jack or somebody could help find it for Mr. Hyra, or Mr. I have Mr. Hyra on the brain, Mr. Krasner.
Okay. That's it. We have other things we need to do tonight, so I will cut it off there.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I just have a few quick comments. First, Ms. Sopsey, I love the organizational changes that you made to this document. I think it's really terrific. I particularly appreciate the new introductory material, what is the CIP? Who's in charge of it? How does this all work? I think it's helpful for not only us as our new planning commissioners and some of us old timers, but also the public to understand this is a lot of money that we're spending over a very long time horizon. So I think it's really important to make that easily understandable for the public. And I think you've done a great job with that. I had one point of feedback on the charts as well. I found it hard to tell some of the colors apart in some of the charts. So I know that's hard when you're printing things and when they have to be online and all these different contexts, but just my personal opinion. I had the same question about federal grant funding and how we're navigating that, particularly like, and I know we don't really know yet exactly which way things are going to go or what the impacts are going to be. I imagine that this is a bigger concern for projects where we're about to kind of like either, take on debt and are expecting part of that to be federal grants. I don't know, like I worry about like us committing to moving forward on projects where we're actually taking on debt with the expectation of getting federal funding and then not having that and then being kind of halfway into the project and already spending money and then be caught without adequate funding. So I guess like I'm wondering, how are we navigating that? Those sort of like more medium-term situations? And how, if at all, are you adjusting like how you're, and you don't have to have an answer to it. I know it's a hard problem, but it just strikes me as like a particularly tricky moment of uncertainty for the city.
Yeah. I don't want to make any predictions because who knows, but I will say we're still submitting reimbursements to VDOT for all of our federal grants. A lot of the federal grants do not have local match in like on the same project appropriated. The local match grants seem to be more state grants. Definitely an unknown factor for pending grant applications that we have submitted. There's not a lot of them. I think there's like 3 right now that are out there. But yeah, for transportation-related and VDOT federal funded projects, we are still submitting reimbursements and getting distributions of funds for those projects. The other areas that we have federal funds are we have a couple grants from HUD in facilities and affordable housing. The facilities one is the EV grant fleet or EV fleet and chargers grant, the electric school bus grant that the schools got previously, and a couple affordable housing things, a lot of affordable housing things. So those are the ones that I'm paying very close attention to right now.
Yeah, you all are very good at getting grants, as evidenced by that pie chart, so which I think is terrific. But I guess like Mr. Kravinsky asked, I think we need to kind of see how things shake out maybe over the next few months and how dire this ends up being for like a lot of different communities, not just us. But understanding the exposure that the CIP has to federal grant funding, even if that's via like other mediators, like regional, I don't know, like if like the regional, like NVTA, does some of their funding come from federal grants? You know what I mean? Like we may think these are state or regional grants, but maybe they actually are also funded federally in some way. So I just think it's good to kind of be prepared for that and understand it, because we may have to adjust our expectations for what we're going to be able to do if we aren't going to be able to have the funding available. So just big picture question, something we need to keep an eye on. I think it's really helpful to add the 10-year outlook, those projects. I looked at that list and was also super curious about it. So I think it's helpful for us to kind of see what's coming down the pike, for staff in their planning and knowing how they're going to be managing these projects. And also for the public to know like kind of what's on the horizon in terms of what the city wants to work on. And that maybe isn't a space where they can advocate for projects if they want to see them in the CIP. I want to ask really quickly about paving as well. My understanding is that we have fair amount of catch-up that we need to do on paving. So the idea is that we're going to be doing that catch-up in the operating. Okay, that's great. As long as that's happening and we don't feel like we need any additional money that we don't have in pay, because I think we could be, the CCT had a very helpful memo on paving, and it sounded like we could be spending double or more what we're currently spending and still only kind of be breaking even on meeting our paving needs. And so are we spending double what we were?
In the last 2 or 3 years, we added $800,000. Like off the top to paving.
Each year?
Yeah, so I think starting in fiscal year '24. So we did it in '24 and '25. We hope to increase that in fiscal year '26. Don't know what that amount will be. Could be,
I would encourage us to to do to catch up, because if we aren't doing the easy paving, then we're doing the really hard roadbed reconstruction, and that's super expensive and disruptive for the community.
Yeah.
So I don't need to lecture you on that, I'm sure, but like I thought the CCT flagged that in a really helpful way, and it's something that should be an easy thing that we should be managing as a community. Let's see. So the only other comment I have is on the property yard. So I guess we would anticipate taking on the debt for planning in fiscal year '28, which could be as soon as like 2027, maybe, which is 2 years from now. I know the ULI recommendation was that the city needs to be a leader for like the catalyst for the redevelopment in that area by, redeveloping our own property. And there's like a very large need for that property to be the property yard to be redeveloped. So I think that timing makes sense. I just want to make sure staff is prepared to do all of that planning for Gordon Road. There are going to be a lot of more recommendations coming out of that, but that's going to be a very heavy lift, both for the planning department and DPW. But I think that's it from me. Thank you very much for your presentation, and to both of you for coming out tonight.
Thank you all. I will.
Did you have another comment, Mr. Duncan?
Just one quick one. I know time goes by. On the housing matter, can you be a little more specific as to when the affordable living policy comes to us? I guess we're part of the loop, and how once it gets to us, that integrates into, a broader discussion of what our priorities would be for spending on certain housing-related items.
Sure. We're kind of cooking both of these at the same time, and we're borrowing heavily from both of them. So what I can tell you is the affordable living policy, as of last fall, is now a part of the comprehensive plan. So it's going to be a comprehensive plan update. It'll come to this body as an update to the comprehensive plan. So the plan right now is to bring it probably sometime in the next month, give you guys an opportunity to review, and then bring it in front of many boards and commissions, comments, letters of support, bring it to council, and then bring it back to this body for final review and consideration as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and then back to council. So time frame, probably in the next month, maybe by the end of March. Back to council probably by May, and then a follow-up in May, June timeframe. Hopefully by the end of June, we'll have it back to council for final consideration and adoption.
Okay, good. So the council has you slated for a discussion about Virginia Village specifically, I think, in early March. Am I right about that?
That is correct.
So how does that track alongside what you just said? Is that folded into the affordable living policy, or does it run separate from it?
Well, at Housing and Human Services, we spin many plates at the same time. So we can actually, I will actually provide the update in early March for Virginia Village. All the things being considered in the affordable living policy are being reflected in that update, and vice versa. And of course, with this Affordable Housing Fund update as well. So all these things are kind of being interlinked, but the idea is we have to keep moving forward.
Okay. Keep those plates spinning. You're showing your age, by the way. You didn't know about plate spinners.
Right.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Any other last questions? Okay. All right, thank you both for coming out tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Shields.
See you in a couple weeks.
Okay, I think we have about an hour left in our normal time. Does anybody need to take a quick 5-minute break or recess? Yeah? Okay, 5-minute recess? Okay. And then we'll pick it up with the next item, which it will be accessory dwellings update. No problem. Okay, we're back. Thank you all for giving us a moment. All right, so the next item on in our work session agenda is accessory dwellings update. Mr. Fuller, do you want to introduce this, or do we want to pass it over to Mr. Trainer?
Jack is the project manager. He's going to go right into his
Great,
presentation.
thank you. Mr. Trainer.
Okay. Good evening, all. Yes, thanks, Mr. Fuller. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is your final work session on accessory dwelling units. So the request tonight and recommendation also is that the Planning Commission's discussion tonight focus on some of the kind of core considerations of the proposal to direct staff in a way to kind of best prepare the draft code. That'll come back to you for your public hearing scheduled for March 5th. That's your next regularly scheduled meeting. Those considerations are setback and height regulations, gross floor area or size, the owner occupancy requirement, an occupancy maximum, special use permit considerations for the Board of Zoning Appeals, specifically for accessory dwelling applications, and addressing. There are several updates I'm going to run through, but I'll start again with the background. And again, this has been a long process, but I think the background's important to kind of reset and frame the conversation. So regulations on accessory dwellings have been adjusted in some localities across the country as a tool for increasing housing availability and assisting property owners with housing costs while having limited impacts on community character or sense of place. Common uses for accessory dwellings include housing for extended family members or family members that need to live nearby and providing a source of supplemental income for homeowners. So with that kind of background in mind, I'll jump into some of the updates in this report. And there are kind of two sort of updates. The first I'll cover are updates to the actual proposal. These are substantive updates made to the draft zoning text that's included at the end of this report. And then there's also updates to the staff report, which covers data and more information requested from previous work sessions. So first going over updates to the recommendation, the proposed height and setback recommendations for detached accessory dwellings have been updated, again, based on the most recent feedback from the Planning Commission's last work session. These will be discussed in more detail when we get to the framework section of the report. The subdivision code has also been included in the draft code to clarify that accessory dwellings would not be permitted to be subdivided apart from the principal dwelling that it is accessory to. That is included in section 3834. And additional substandard lot considerations. This was a request that, or some feedback that we received at the last Planning Commission work session where height maximums would be reduced for detached accessory dwellings located on substandard lots, but would not be, as proposed, permitted to be shorter than 15 feet in height. So again, I'll cover that in a little more detail further on in the report. But there are several updates to the staff report that cover data and more information, which I'll cover now. Beginning with a review of industry standard sizes. Staff's included some additional information from Fairfax County about their experiences with built accessory dwelling size and numbers. There's a question about basements and projections, projections being things like porches and decks, things that project into the required setbacks. As proposed, both would be permitted for accessory dwellings. Finished basements would count towards the gross floor area considerations, whereas things like porches would not necessarily count. That kind of consideration more comes down to the way it's built. If it's insulated and is kind of more clearly part of the structure, then it could become a zoning administrator determination about whether that counts towards the GFA or not. But generally, there are rules governing projections depending on the type of projection and how far it can reach into a required setback. So the short answer is that both would be, again, as proposed, regulated the same way that they are for single-family homes today. Bulk plan analysis for the proposed amendments. So Commissioner Friedlander shared a analysis that she conducted. That's been included as an attachment to this report for the Planning Commission's benefit, and happy to bring that up in the discussion. We've also updated the bulk plan graphics that were introduced at the last work session to reflect the updated height and setback requirements. Again, showing the kind of differences in the regulation stringency of what's being proposed for accessory dwellings versus other buildings that are regulated in the residential districts. And again, I'll cover this more in more detail when we get to that section of the staff report. Regarding the owner occupancy requirement, the city attorney has distributed some communications to the Planning Commission under separate cover. She's also on the line remotely for any questions for her. But generally, given the kind of checkered pattern of lawsuits that have been brought forth on regarding owner occupancy, the city attorney is recommending that an owner occupancy requirement not be included in the Planning Commission's recommendation. Regarding historic properties, there was a question about whether any accessory dwelling constructed on a historic property would be subject to the Historic Architecture Review Board, or HARB. Section 48794D and Section 48792(6) of the zoning ordinance does confirm that such a scenario would be subject to HARB review. Separate addressing. So staff has had more kind of clarifying conversations with city building officials and neighboring jurisdictions that do address separate addressing to confirm that, yes, separate addressing would be available, and doing so would not require separate utilities on the accessory building. So that's a point of clarification from the last work session. There was also a request for a review of the criteria that the Board of Zoning Appeals use currently to review special use permit applications. That is included in the draft code, but it's also found in the zoning ordinance under Section 48172(5)(b). And then the last two, the updated Virginia State Bill information. So throughout this year-long process, the same Virginia Senate bill has been referenced. That bill no longer exists, and so the corresponding information that had been included in that bill, including in the draft framework, have also been removed because that's no longer a valid point of consideration or comparison. So things at the state level are moving a little quickly. There is more information about that in the staff report, and I'm happy to address that. But generally, what's been introduced now are much broader proposals at the state level that don't include things like height and setback requirements that the previous bill did include. And then lastly, additional board and commission comments. Before posting last week, the Housing Commission and the Urban Forestry Commission had shared comments on the proposal with the Planning Commission. And then this afternoon, we received the Economic Development Authority's recommendation that was updated to the agenda. Hopefully, folks got a chance to review that. And so highlighted here is some more information regarding Fairfax's accessory living units, or ALUs, as they're referred to in the county. And then we also have some more information on the Virginia state legislation there. I'm going to keep going for time's sake to the draft framework to cover or just kind of point out the kind of bulk of the substantive changes to the recommendation, which again have mostly been covered at a high level. Here we're at the kind of size or gross floor area. There was a request from the commission to include kind of additional standards about or definitions of a standard, of the industry standard size for accessory dwellings. And so we included AARP's consideration here, included in their guidelines for accessory dwellings called the ABCs of ADUs. That's been a mainstay in the attachments to the staff report. On page 4, the ARP describes a typical accessory dwelling being approximately 600 to 1,000 square feet. And then going down, owner occupancy requirement, there's no update there. So the only kind of substantive changes, again, are to the height and setback. So here we'll start with the height. Again, staff is recommending height maximums, revised height maximums from the last work session based on the feedback received of 1 story or 15 feet, whichever is less, when set back 5 feet from the property line, or 1.5 stories or 20 feet, whichever is less, when set back 10 feet from the property line. And then regarding setbacks, there's no actual change to the setback. Staff is still recommending 5 or 10 feet from the side or rear property line, again, depending on the height of the structure. One change is a revision from the previously recommended 10-foot minimum separation of the nearest walls of an accessory dwelling and the primary dwelling. That recommendation has been reduced to 5 feet in order to introduce some more flexibility on the positioning of and potential size of the accessory dwelling on the lot. In concert with the setbacks that would be provided or required from the lot lines, a 5-foot minimum separation actually opens up a lot more flexibility on the lot to site. Again, that accessory dwelling and consider existing conditions on the lot like trees or vegetation and open space. And so getting into the staff analysis part of the staff report, this is where I'm going to walk through kind of a lot more of the data that's included here for industry sizes. Again, the only kind of major update in this part is some information about Fairfax County. They've actually only had about 5 detached accessory living units built since their update happened in 2021. The vast majority, as Commissioner Krasner has noted, have been internal units. So for height and setback, this is where, again, I think the bulk of the updates have been. So we've updated the table here showing what the setback and the height requirements are for a proposed accessory dwelling, in addition to those for a single-family home and accessory buildings in the R1A and R1B district. As a reminder, we've included the setback to height ratio column here, really as a way to kind of simplify that comparison process. So you're not just comparing setbacks to setbacks or heights to height. The ratio, again, is a setback to height ratio, and so it's easier to compare one number for building type and in the zoning district than looking at multiple numbers. And so a higher ratio indicates a more restrictive or regulated situation where a increased setbacks required for the corresponding height. So most of these numbers haven't changed, again, since the last work session. What has changed is for a 5-foot setback requirement, a recommended 15-foot max height translates to a 0.33 ratio which isn't far from a single-family home in the R1B, but is further from the accessory building than was previously at the 5-foot setback, 20-foot height requirement, and then a 10-foot setback and a 20-foot height translates to a 0.5 ratio, which is the highest, but does offer flexibility if both options are allowed, and can also take into consideration neighborhood privacy, tree canopy, and other factors on the lot. And we've updated these graphics here to show where those kind of ratios track across the different buildings. So in the green, we have the accessory building. That's a 3-foot setback from the property line up to 12 foot to the midline of the roof. And then in the middle, in both are the accessory dwellings at different setback and heights relative to the single-family home. This is in the R1A district. And then we've included them also for the R1B district. So you can see that, across the different examples, the proposed height and setbacks are generally consistent in the R1A. And in R1B, the slopes are again pretty close for the 5-foot setback and 15-foot height, but become sort of outlier in the R1B district when you're requiring that 0.5 slope, when the others are between in the 20s and in the 0.25 or 0.29. Okay, regarding lot coverage, so hopefully this is kind of helpful in showing how the setback considerations affect the buildable area of the lot. So we've included here two representations of many of the same assumptions, which is a 7,500 square foot lot, which is a standard size lot in the R1B district, and also a median-sized R1B home with a footprint of 1,200 square feet. The house is oriented towards the front setback, which is 25 feet in the R1B district, and that leaves a buildable area in the back of 2,500 square feet when you have 5-foot setbacks, and a 1,800 square foot buildable area when you have 10-foot setbacks. We've also shown, the positioning of the accessory dwelling is this whole rectangle, and then the blue area is the area of the accessory dwelling that occupies the required rear yard setback. That's relative to the principal dwelling. So I'm happy to talk, a little more about that if there are questions. Regarding substandard lots, we did pull some more data for substandard lots. And again, for substandard lots, we're talking about lots that are smaller than the required minimum lot area for the zoning district. So in R1A, the minimum lot size is 11,250 square feet. And in R1B, it's that 7,500 square feet. So we looked at using GIS data, we looked at the number of lots that were beneath those numbers in area for their respective district, and found that about 40% of lots in the R1A district are substandard, and about 36% of lots in the R1B district are substandard. And following up on the Planning Commission's feedback and discussion held at its January 22nd meeting, staff did include in the draft code a provision where the existing standards for substandard lot height reduction for a single-family home would be reduced to no shorter than 15 feet, which is the kind of lowest height that staff is recommending as a by right allowance. So that would follow basically a proportion of how much smaller the lot is relative to the standard applied to the height. So it would follow this number 3 provision here. And then, so regarding size, coming up next, but just, I guess, some more data to help kind of guide the discussion tonight are kind of quartiles showing just how substandard some of these lots are. So these are quartiles, right? So, 25% of all the substandard lots or intervals of 25% are shown here based on the lot size. And then, so in the R1B district, obviously you have smaller lots. And so we took this, 5,969 number, and we applied it later for the gross floor area to include if the Planning Commission wanted to consider allowing a larger size accessory dwelling for smaller homes. This was something that has come up in some of the public meetings that have happened, and so that data here was meant to, again, help guide the discussion. This is a question I think staff could use a little bit more direction on. And then, again, regarding owner occupancy, a little more kind of background on best practices and what those have found are included here. Again, the city attorney has communicated with the Planning Commission and City Council under separate cover, and is available to answer any questions that she can in a public meeting. But I believe that's going to wrap up my presentation. Okay, so a couple public engagement updates before I do real quickly. So in the time since Planning Commission's last work session, January 22nd, the paper questionnaire that were deployed at the January open house meetings was digitized and put on the accessory dwelling update website. This is meant to be, another public engagement tool. It does not limit the number of responses or who can take it. So applicants are, self-identifying. So it's not statistically representative, of the city's population. But again, it's meant as another engagement tool. We will extract the responses and open text responses that we get from the questionnaire that was made available, I think, a week or two ago, and we'll have a summary of that for the Planning Commission for the public hearing. And then postcards have also been deployed. We deployed 3,100 postcards, which represents all the residential addresses in the R1A, B, and M districts. Those are the 3 districts that would be affected under the proposal. I know that there was a request from council and the Planning Commission to include all residential addresses in the city. Unfortunately, due to staff resources and timing, we weren't able to accommodate that request exactly. But again, we were able to get postcards out to all the residential addresses in the affected zoning districts under this proposal. And so I will kind of wrap up there with the timing section. Again, the Planning Commission had its first work session over a year ago, January 17th. You all had your scope of work meeting and then spent the majority, all of 2024 holding work sessions along with City Council and different boards and commissions. We held 6 open house public meetings. And now Planning Commission is at its final scheduled work session. Again, we're calling it a markup session, hoping to kind of coalesce the Planning Commission's directive to staff for action ahead of the March 5th public hearing, which is scheduled for the Planning Commission. Following the Planning Commission's public hearing, City Council will hold its final work session scheduled for March 10th, and then City Council's final consideration date is scheduled for April 14th. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Trainer. So I think maybe you could scroll back up to the top of I want to make sure that we get you what you need on those items that you flagged at the very beginning of the staff report, yes. So I think our approach tonight is we want to do somewhat of like an informal poll vote on kind of where people are on some of these issues. If we have any quick kind of clarifying questions, if we want to do some discussion on each of these before we get to that, that's okay. I just will caution us that it's already 10 p.m.
Set this agenda.
Yeah. So, and I know we aim to end at 10:30. I don't want to keep staff here late. But yeah, so I know it does not give us a ton of time for a meaty discussion. Can we just go through these one at a time? And I'm curious to hear any feedback on the revised setback and height regulations and where people are on those currently. Don't jump, I'll jump in at once.
I think generally speaking, after having an opportunity to tour some of these and seeing some of these, some examples of some of these that were built out, the 5-foot setback for the 1 to 1.5 story ones seemed more than reasonable. Like they did, I mean, it's denser, there's more stuff there, but if we're going to go ahead and do this, I don't see the benefit of moving it back 10 feet really outweighs the cost of the additional space. So just focusing on item number 1, I feel like 5 feet is probably a reasonable starting point, and if it ends up being, like we start building them and they end up being terrible, we could adjust based on what we see.
Great, thank you. Mr. Stevens, I see your finger hovering.
Yeah, I'm basically at the same position. You've kind of pulled these back a little bit. I was probably okay with where we were before, but I know there's a lot of voices contributing to the discussion here. So the challenge is trying to find kind of the right middle ground that will get this past the finish line. So I'm okay with what you are proposing. I could even see maybe some additional layering. So rather than just being kind of a step function of 5 feet, 10 feet, 10 feet on the height, and 15 or 20. Doing something in between to give a little bit more flexibility. I don't have a proposal off the top of my head, but it's something I think I've heard some folks discuss, and I can see the rationale for it. But basically, I'm okay with what Mr. Trainer has proposed in the staff memo for setback and height regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Kravinsky, did you want to weigh in?
Well, first of all, I'm also okay with what Mr. Trainer has proposed for the setback and height. I just had one question, though. Is there a different setback? Did we just say that there was a different setback for substandard lots than for standard lots?
No, it's just height that is scaled.
Right.
Just the height has scaled.
Setbacks are the same.
Okay, the setbacks
height.
are the same. Okay, that's all.
Great. Ms. Friedlander?
Thank you. I do appreciate the site plan, kind of plan view of the yards. So thank you for including that in your updated report. I think that was helpful to kind of see how that will affect, and then also updating those bulk plan analysis diagrams as well. I think that was really helpful. I think just as a point of intent, I was not trying to do a bulk plane analysis. I heard a lot of concern that maybe 15 foot wasn't possible for a midline of a height of a structure, and I wanted to just kind of show what's out there that these things are possible. So I'm actually okay with the revised 5-foot setback with the 15-foot height, as well as the revised 10-foot setback and the 20-foot height. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Krasner?
I'm not okay with it. I don't like it still. I think 5 feet, I think a 5-foot setback for 15 feet is too close, especially on an undersized lot. You know, I think of like the undersized lots in Greenway Downs, and I think of the undersized lots in my neighborhood. And as you just showed, the percentage of undersized lots in the city is significant, over a third to almost half. And so the fact that, you know, we're not going to allow for some treatment there, I still don't understand why we wouldn't require them to meet the standard side setback. You know, a substandard lot, for example, you already get a little bit of a relaxation, you know, to 7.5 feet instead of 10. So I wouldn't suggest that, you know, we need to go further back than that, but I don't know. I think it's too close. I think our ordinance is already, I didn't like the starting point. I think our ordinance is already too generous by saying 3 feet, you know, for a typical single accessory structure. I think that's way too close. So I don't like it. I think it should be further back. I've said it 3 or 4 times. I may be shouting at the, you know, by myself in the dark, but I think it should be further back. I think it should be 7.5. I think for substandard lots in R1B, it should be just like their principal structure, 7.5 feet.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner. Mr. Duncan, your turn.
I'm okay with the staff proposal.
Great, thank you. I'm also okay with the staff proposal, and I would second Mr. Stevens' recommendation to introduce some, so we don't have like a threshold where you all of a sudden have to jump to 10 feet. So you hit 16 feet and all of a sudden you're at a 10-foot setback. So I actually drafted some language. I think what you have in the staff proposal is detached accessory dwellings up to 15 feet or 1 story in height must be set back 5 feet from rear and side lot lines. All others must be set back 10 feet from rear and side lot lines. So I would propose detached accessory dwellings up to 15 feet or 1 story in height must be set back 5 feet from rear and side lot lines. All others must be set back 1 additional foot from rear and side lot lines for each additional foot in height up to 20 feet or 1.5 stories. So a foot by foot, just because every foot matters. All right. Anything else on height and setbacks? What is next? Gross floor area and size. So staff is recommending 1,000 square feet. Do we want to just go down the line? Mr. Kravinsky, you want to go first on this one?
Sure. Well, I think I'm probably tilting at windmills, so I'll just mention this last time, but I do think we're missing an opportunity in constraining this to 1,000 square feet. I think we're missing an opportunity to support our teachers and our workforce with families. I think we're losing some smaller housing opportunities for families and forcing them to move outside the Beltway to the outskirts of the metropolitan area if we don't offer that housing inside the Beltway. I think we're losing an opportunity to provide, to keep some older structures, which could potentially be tear downs. And I think if we had a larger square foot allowance, we may be able to save some of those older houses in the city. So, I mean, I would opt for supporting something similar to what they have in Richmond, which is a third of the floor area of the main house, up to 1,250 or 1,500 square feet. I'm not sure that's something that's going to win the day, but I thought I would just throw that argument out there.
Thank you, Mr. Kravinsky. Ms. Friedlander, can I just go down the line?
Sure.
Thanks.
So I'm actually okay with the 1,000 and capping it at 1,000. I just feel that if you start going up in square footage, you're actually creating a less affordable environment. The intent is to bring some of the square footages down to allow for a smaller rental or accessory dwelling. And this isn't to say if you wanted to go more, you just go through the special use permit process. So I don't think I think the key to this policy is really allowing an accessory dwelling detached structure. And I think if it's good to keep it at 1,000 feet. If somebody wants to go higher, then they have the opportunity to go pursue that under an SUP.
Okay, helpful. Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
I'm okay with the 1,000 cap on by right for the
Okay.
gross floor area.
Great. Mr. Krasner?
I'm generally okay with the 1,000. I mean, I think that is on the big size for some of the yards that we have. If you think about the dimensions that are necessary to get to 1,000 on a single-story structure, it's starting to get pretty big, and so the coverage issue the lot coverage issue may wind up not making that too feasible anyway. But in general, I guess it's, that's probably the largest I would want to see, at least as a starting point. And I think most people, when they build these things, wouldn't be doing, even up to the 1,000. It's quite large, actually. Most people don't want their whole backyard to be taken up by building. Maybe someone might. But, yeah, in general, that part of it, I don't have a major concern with.
Okay, Mr. Duncan?
I agree with Mr. Kravinsky's views and would encourage the council to give them further consideration. For our purposes, I'd support 1,000.
Okay. Mr. Polinsky?
Yeah, I'm just a broken record. I support 1,000 square feet as a starting point for this process.
I also support 1,000 square feet. This is already a little more generous than what Arlington and Alexandria offer their residents. I feel like it comports pretty well with giving homeowners a good amount of flexibility for how they might use their detached accessory dwellings while still maintaining the sort of accessory nature of them. Okay, owner occupancy requirement. I'll start over here. Maybe Mr. Polinsky, do you mind going first on this one?
Is there really, say this without, I don't think it's necessary to have the owner occupancy requirement in this. I think with a minimal size area, like if we're talking about 1,000 square feet at most, we're not talking about building second houses and third houses. I know that there's some concern around the concept of a developer coming in and buying up land as a way to, and building 2, 3 type houses on these lots. I think with some of the restrictions that are in there, I think we prevent that. And I think if we see that start to happen, we revisit this particular solution. But for the purposes of this discussion, I don't think that we need to have owner occupancy as part of the deal.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder to all of us that we do have Miss Sally Gillette on the line with us. Thank you for joining us tonight, Miss Gillette. She's here to answer any policy questions related to owner occupancy. And yeah, Mr. Duncan.
I agree with Mr. Polinsky and would support the city attorney's advice that we not include the owner occupancy requirement.
Thank you. Mr. Krasner.
Well, no surprise. I don't agree with that at all. I fully respect our city attorney. In fact, I had exchanged some privileged conversations with her, and I appreciate her thoughtful, legal research and acumen. And in no way am I, trying to, disparage, her abilities to provide us with a recommendation. But I've also researched the issue. I'm not an attorney, but I, consulted with other Northern Virginia attorneys, who are zoning and land use attorneys. And the reality is there's no prohibition on it. It's not settled law. Our most progressive neighbors, Alexandria, Arlington, have this restriction. Fairfax, Prince William, City of Richmond, Virginia Beach, Pockwausan, Suffolk. I'm confusing some of those big ones down there. In any event, it's quite popular around the Commonwealth. Now, some may argue that there hasn't been a court case. They could all be wrong, and it's possible. However, I don't think we're really risking much by, kind of putting a reasonable restriction that might prevent. Why would Falls Church want to be a guinea pig? Why would we want to put ourselves out there? I think the risk, is just too high for what I don't know what we're gaining by trying to kind of chart our own path and open it up and see what happens. As when all our neighbors have thought that there's a merit to doing that. I know there's been some concern that there's not a legitimate government interest in doing it. I disagree with that. I think that it protects current city homeowners from having, whether it's a speculator or whoever it might be, whether it's owned by a corporation or just an individual, from having 2 rental units when they otherwise maybe wouldn't have thought about doing that. Now they say, well, now I can get a second rental unit. I don't have to live there. Just maximize my profit. And now you have that situation. I think that's a negative. I think that's a negative for current city homeowners. I know we have a purpose here about trying to, do this to benefit folks, but we also have to think about existing residents and homeowners and trying to put some reasonable guardrails on this. I'll also note, and I know Ms. Gillette's here. I guess she's been patient to sit through this whole meeting. I will ask her a question, I guess, since she's here. I know there's been discussion about, the state legislation in Richmond. The current version of the bill in Richmond, while it would essentially make accessory dwelling units by right, it specifically then lays out restrictions that local municipalities would be able to include in their ordinance. It specifically, at least in the current draft, says that it would enable us, or anyone for that matter, to include an owner occupancy requirement. So I guess my question for our city attorney would be, I know this is hypothetical, but that's the draft of the ordinance that's out there. If that was adopted by the General Assembly and signed by the governor, with some of her concerns about the legitimacy of having such a restriction, and whether or not it's enabled under the Dillon rule, would that assuage that concern at all? If the current draft of the bill, as it's written today, which specifically mentions it, was adopted?
Yes, I would respond in 2 ways. One, I do think that bill no longer has that provision, but notwithstanding, the hypothetical is if the state allowed us expressly to adopt an owner occupancy requirement, would it change my opinion? The answer is absolutely yes, it would.
Yeah.
Because that's the crux of my opinion, is that it's not currently allowed.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And I think that, again, it's, there hasn't been a court case in Virginia, and there hasn't been any kind of settled law to tell us that we can't do it. And I guess we could all be wrong. I mean, everyone else in the Commonwealth who has this restriction could all be wrong. But then at least we'd be in good company. I think the risk of I know, we don't want to go to court. We don't want to invite litigation. That's never a smart thing to do. But I think that if there was a court case and if something changed in the future, then we'd have to change our ordinance to comply with, any prohibition or a court decision. And that hasn't happened yet. And I think that it falls under the health, safety, and welfare, provisions of why we have zoning in the first place. We can put restrictions on it. Nothing's really compelling us we don't have to have ADUs at all. But if we're going to have them, I think we can put reasonable restrictions on them. And I still think it's reasonable. And it's not just me personally thinking that it's reasonable. I'm basing that on, again, looking at what many, many other well-informed professionals around the Commonwealth who've looked at this issue have decided that it's acceptable to have that restriction, and they have it. So I've also, just for what it's worth, we've received a lot of correspondence, and many folks have referenced that as something that they would want to see as part of this from some of the neighbors and public correspondence we've received, and I'm also sensitive to that. Part of the reason I'm up here is to, look out for city residents. And so anyhow, so I won't talk about it any longer, but I think it's important. To me, it's a crucial part of putting some relative, again, some reasonable restrictions on this, and I'm going to continue to advocate for it. And it may tilt my position on the whole thing. I'll be very honest with that, but I don't know yet. We'll see where we go.
Thank you, Mr. Krasner, for sharing your opinion. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I'm okay with kind of bypassing the owner occupancy requirement at this stage in light of the legal analysis that we've received. Also, if I really felt that there was a risk of corporate ownership, I might be willing to side with Mr. Krasner as far as, taking that risk, whatever level of risk there is. But I just don't see spending $400,000 to get, an AD rental in Falls Church. I just don't see that as being a real high opportunity for a lot of corporations. But, I could be wrong. But anyway, that's where I stand for now.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Ms. Friedlander?
Thank you. I'm actually in the camp with Commissioner Krasner on this one. I do think it's a reasonable set of guardrails to protect other residents who may not be who may be neighbors to an absentee landlord, and I think allowing an absentee landlord situation can really change the fabric of our neighborhoods, and I think that's what we're here to protect for the rest of the citizens as well. So it's not just for the interest of one, it's for the interest of many. And I appreciate the legal analysis, but I've also gotten also conflicting analysis as well. So I'm actually, the owner occupancy requirement is I think we need to keep it for keeping it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kavinsky?
I don't think we need an occupancy requirement based on, one, the legal analysis, and two, I think it adds a lot of complications, particularly in a region like this where we have people doing overseas rotations and things like that. So I don't know that it's all that it's needed.
Great, thank you. And I also do not support an owner occupancy requirement. I didn't support it before we had the legal opinion from Ms. Gillette. But I appreciate that legal opinion and respect it and value our city lawyers' insight into this issue. I guess from my view, it's sort of like, what is our purpose with this? And is this the narrowest way that we can achieve that purpose? I'm all for not writing rules for our citizens if we don't have to. So I think if we're trying to manage the risk of corporate ownership, I agree with Mr. Stevens that it just, rationally doesn't make a lot of sense to me that, adding a potential, like a $200,000 to $300,000 ADU to a $2.5 million single-family home is going to incentivize developers to all of a sudden hold on to those properties and start renting them out. So I just don't see that. Mr. Trainer, you skipped over the very helpful analysis that you did of the current state of corporate ownership in the city of Falls Church. Thank you for pulling that data together. I found it helpful. I think you found that there are 4% of units in the city are owned by LLCs. Is that correct? Currently, today.
If that.
I think it was around, 3 or 4%.
Pretty modest, sure.
So I think it's very small. And I would say, like, if we're worried about an impact on our neighbors, we have nuisance codes. There are other ways that we can kind of manage these impacts, and I think better, more targeted to the concerns that we all share for how these will be received. And in general, my goal is to offer homeowners more flexibility, and these restrictions would potentially make getting financing for these harder. So I think that's just the wrong direction. I also have questions about how exactly the city would manage an owner occupancy requirement. I don't, see people evicting, the city coming in and evicting people from a property. So for all those reasons, I do not support it. Okay, I think we can move on to occupancy maximum. Maybe I'll start with you, Mr. Stevens. I'm going to work my way out, and then we'll go this way.
I think we're still at the 3 level, is that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Trainer? Yeah. Seems like the situations might arise where that would be a problem, but I think out of the gate, I can accept the limit that you propose.
Ms. Friedlander?
I would be in support of the staff proposal for 3.
Thank you. Mr. Kravinsky?
I would support a higher limit consistent with the Housing Commission, who looked at this and said, if we really want to support housing in the city and make it affordable, 3 is too limiting. At a minimum, it should be 4, and with the possibility of no limit at all.
Thank you. Mr. Krasner?
Yeah, I'm fine with the 3. I think that's reasonable.
Okay. Mr. Duncan?
In furtherance of my interest in opening up the character of our neighborhoods to include more young families with children, I would prefer strongly that we allow 4. That would be parents and 2 very young kids probably who would be getting their start in the world. And this would give us, a chance to help people like that. I'm willing to support 3. I would agree with Mr. Kravinsky, basically, though, that I don't fear that a larger number would be a big problem here in Falls Church, and 4 would be my preference.
Thank you. Mr. Polinsky?
In the essence of time, I'll just say 4 would be my preference.
Okay.
But 3 is fine if we have to go that way.
Thank you. I also support 3 or 4. It's 10:25. Our rules of procedure require us to make a motion to extend our meeting past 10:30. Can you do that, Mr. Duncan?
Madam Chair, I move that we continue the meeting until 11 p.m.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Okay, where are we? Special use permit requirement and criteria for accessory dwelling considerations. Can you elaborate on this, Mr. Trainer?
Sure. So I believe the discussion last time was, should there be accessory dwelling specific considerations for special use permits that the BZA should consider when an application is submitted to them?
Okay. Do you remember where in the staff report the criteria for the BZA was? I know you included that.
Yeah. Let me, subdivision. Yeah, it's in the code.
Thank you for joining us.
So here we are, Article 3, Board of Zoning Appeals. Powers, special use permits.
Okay, so here we go. The board shall give due regard to the nature and condition of all adjacent uses and structures, probable effect upon them, proposed special characteristics design. Okay, it's pretty broad.
It's pretty broad.
Are there, I should have checked in with you earlier on this because I think I was one of the people that asked about like what kinds of criteria they're going to be evaluating. Sorry, I've asked about this language insertion a few times, this except for applications regarding accessory dwellings. Are we inserting that?
That's a proposed addition, yes. So right now, the Planning Commission does make a recommendation on special use permit applications to the BZA. That includes accessory dwellings today, which requires an SUP in all cases. The proposal is that in order to kind of streamline that process, make it less expensive for homeowners, that such applications would only go to the BZA.
Okay. Are there ideas for specific requirements or specific criteria that we would want the BZA to evaluate for accessory dwellings when they're making a decision? I think this is really just for the RM district. Is that correct?
RM or the conversion of existing accessory buildings that do not comply with accessory dwelling standards. So if it's set back 3 feet, which is allowed for an accessory building today, but the current proposal, the minimum setback is 5 feet. So conversion of that would require special use permit.
Okay.
I mean,
Go ahead.
I mean, I think this language is kind of broad. We don't see a lot of special permits in general, at the BZA, at least I didn't when I was on it. We don't have as many of those types of uses and they're infrequent, but I mean, most of this is okay. It's very general. I don't know if we'd want to have, we maybe don't have time tonight to draft that, but I mean, you might want to have some more specific language that speaks to, the provision of adequate, like if they're going to parking and other negative impacts. And I know it's kind of getting at that by saying, the probable effect upon the proposed use and adjacent uses and structures. It's written in a language that's probably many decades old that's in there, but not be detrimental. I mean, it basically gets at it. It's so broad that it gives the BZA, I guess, the ability to kind of look at anything, you know? So you kind of look, it's actually a double-sided coin, you know, you might want to, depending on how you view this issue, you might want it to be more specific so that their decisions really based on
Specific
these specific
criteria.
things, or maybe not. Maybe you want to, you know, have it be very broad like this. So I don't know. I mean, there's some rationale either way. I would delete it. I mean, one thing I would say is, I think I recall why staff recommended kind of taking us out of the picture for these cases, like, because it's like another step, but there's so few of them. I don't know. I mean, I don't see why we would, you know, do that. I'd rather not make an exemption just for that purpose. If we're seeing the other special permits, which there aren't that many of them, I mean, I don't know. I personally would still want to see it on the planning commission. So I would delete that, but as far as more specific guidelines, I mean, that's I don't know. I don't know how folks feel about that. It depends how we want to do it. I mean, I guess everything you could be concerned about is probably you could find language in the existing language, rather, to have the BZA, you know, address it and or deny something as a result. So it kind of depends what you're looking to do, because it is pretty broad. So something to think about.
Any other thoughts? There isn't really a vote on this one or poll on this one per se.
We're not going to.
I don't know, what would you say about it? Any thoughts? You don't have to have any, it's,
I mean, I thought.
is your mic on?
Is the question of whether the special use permit needs to come up to the planning commission for approval, or can be approved at the BZA level?
I think that is a question that Mr. Krasner is raising. So staff is recommending that for the expediency of the applicant and to sort of every step can kind of cost an applicant money, right? And these are not developers, but these are kind of like everyday citizens who are trying to build these homes. You know, they have to have their architects and their builders come out for all of these meetings. And so in order to streamline the meetings, they're recommending that they not go to the Planning Commission and instead just go directly to the BZA. So I think the question to us is, are there particular criteria that we want to recommend the BZA analyze in those reviews for the special use permits?
Well, if the votable issue is, does it have to come to the planning commission, then I would say no. But
Okay.
if the votable issue is, are there specific criteria that need to be elevated, then I don't have any.
Okay. I think we may need to follow up on this one unless other folks have more thoughts. Mr. Stevens?
I just, you know, would want to make sure that that the BZA is not working at cross purposes to council, assuming they pass, you know, this ordinance. But I'm not sure, unless I sit down and look at this wording a little bit more carefully than just doing it right now, that I can come up with any kind of specific way to ensure that they're not, you know, that they're working in sync with city council. So I'll punt.
Any thoughts down this way? No.
I would just say, I mean, just, sorry to go again, but, I mean, if staff wants to look at, some of our neighbors have, like, specific special permit criteria for accessory dwelling units. And so, you know, again, you might want to look at that and as a starting point. I mean, yeah, like I said, it depends where we want to go. If we want to make it more straightforward and not give the BZA as much sort of like width and breadth to, you know, kind of, you know, use their own judgment, you could put some very specific criteria that they need to look at, you know, or you could keep it like this and it's very broad. And I mean, I think at the end of the day, what are we concerned about, right? We should think about what would be the concern about an existing structure that doesn't meet the other rules. And typically it's going to be, right, like some kind of negative impact on a neighbor because of how close it is or how tall it is. And is it causing a detriment to the neighbor? So maybe some language that really hones in on that, whether it's like a parking issue or it's a, I don't know, I guess yeah, or again, the position of that structure in comparison to what's on the adjacent lot, things like that. So, I don't know. I don't know what the temperature of the board is, or sorry, the commission is to do that, but that would be one way to, kind of make it more clear what you're expecting the BZA to do. I mean, otherwise, they would, like I said, they'd probably consider all those things anyway, because, this is so broad. But just something to think about, I guess, between now and when we see this again. I don't know. Doesn't really give us an answer, but.
Mr. Polinsky?
I did want to add one question, like, is the exception for the applications regarding accessory, the addition to this particular coverage to be related to primarily the substandard lots or the lots that, like, anyone who wants to put up a thing, or is this just a general addition to this particular thing, to this particular section?
The SUPs?
So if somebody's going to get a special exception anyway, or they have to go get it for whatever
The
reason.
only time people have to do that is if they have a existing structure that they want to turn into an AD,
Right.
or if they're in the RM district. I think those are the only two. Or they want to do something, I guess, different than
Something
what
different
we're
that we give them
allowing
by right.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we change that process. Like,
What process? Which
so if the process for these applications, why
I
we would
see.
change this standard, this.
For ADs in particular.
If
Yeah.
if there's a by right option, and it doesn't fit into that, I don't know why we'd fit. Like, the separate question of what Mr. Krasner was talking about, Mr. Krasinski was talking about in relation to, like, what are the standards?
I
But
think-
I
yeah,
don't
I
think
think-
change this process.
Yeah, I think it would be the same process. The idea is that we could just maybe provide a little guidance for the BZA as to like what we think they should be considering.
That part, I don't know if I have a particular opinion on right now, right at this second.
Yeah.
I think the thing on the screen that says, except for applications regarding.
Oh, I
accessory
see,
dwelling,"
whether it comes to us.
that doesn't feel like, I don't understand why we would change that process for the non-by right pieces that need to.
So I guess the reason to change it is really for the homeowner's benefit because
mean,
it saves them money.
You could talk me into changing it for everything, like all of it
Yeah,
goes
I mean,
straight
we
to the
might,
BZA.
yeah, we.
But that's
we
why I
might-
don't understand why
We
we do
uncover
this.
lots of things in the code that we might want to
Yeah,
change in
yeah.
bigger picture as we're doing these kinds of projects, so, yeah. But yeah, this is one place where we would
I just,
be able to do that.
can we only do that because we're talking about accessory dwellings?
Yeah, I think
So
so.
we couldn't just do, we couldn't just say all, like, things go to the BZA?
Well, maybe that's a question for staff. Like, I don't know, you and Mr. Krasner may disagree about the role of the planning commission in providing recommendations to the BZA, so I don't want like our.
Well, I don't want to do it at 11 o'clock at night after,
Yeah.
like, a long meeting. I'm trying to understand, like, the reason for adding this in here and carving out this exception to this process for this thing, which doesn't seem to align to either. It all goes to the BZA or it all goes to the planning commission in the current process.
Yeah, Mr. Trainer, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think maybe next time we could come back with maybe some other examples of things that like require special use permit, if that would be helpful. Because like many other districts have allowable provisions that, require special use permit, and they all point, to the same criteria, but those allowable uses vary by district in degree. So this is, so right now, accessory dwellings are one example that, it requires a special use permit, and it goes to the planning commission and the BZA. But because I think accessory dwellings are sort of a unique case where, you're talking about a property owner, required to develop drawings and basically act like a developer, but they may not have the same resources as a developer. And depending on any comments or input by the BZA could lead to more expenses that could be potential barrier to achieve an accessory dwelling for their needs. So kind of for those considerations.
I get the concept. I just don't think I agree with the concept that we would carve out this outlay for this particular thing as part of this process and not do it just I don't disagree. It makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, why this thing to this process?
I mean, I would tend to agree, and you got to also think not just us, but future commissions. I mean, we may want to give our 2 cents to the BZA, depending on the BZA composition changes over time, and you know, there may be a time when, you know, they kind of lean a certain way or lean a different way, and to retain the ability for the planning commission to, we're just providing a recommendation after all. I don't think we're so bad. Make them come here. So, you know, we're just providing a recommendation. Yes, it's one more step and one more meeting, and, you know, but
It may help the applicant be successful.
May help
they help
potentially.
them if we, you know, again,
If we support it.
if this commission, right, supported it, and that makes it, you know, that's just one more, right, arrow in the quiver for that applicant at the BZA to say, well, if the planning commission recommended you
Right.
approve it.
And,
So-
sorry, and what you stated in a lot of the documentations, we're talking 2 or 3 applications, or 2 or 3 ADUs a year, of which are one of them going to go zero? Most of them are zero are going to go through this process. Maybe a lot right at the beginning. Maybe there's more, but I think
There may be more conversions at the beginning, but I think it's more important to think about the cost to the individual homeowner, you know, for each one. So it's not really so much our time or even the BZA's time, but like, you know, but you're right, like that maybe we could be a benefit, you know, maybe we could benefit, our input could benefit the,
yeah. It's also late.
Applicant.
I don't need.
Yeah, I know.
I've said the same thing 3 times. I don't want to.
I'm sorry, you don't have like super clear guidance from us. Any other quick thoughts on sort of what's on the screen here and the role of the planning commission in the special use permit process? Any strong feelings? No? Mr. Duncan?
If it helps me pick up a 6th or 7th vote for my generally more permissive attitudes on all the other questions, then I would be willing to consider this guardrail as, you know, not unreasonable.
So you would want,
So that if somebody came with a accessory dwelling that did not meet the by right standards and wanted to plead their case, I'd be willing for the planning commission to hear that and make its own recommendations. I think that would be hope that that would be rare enough that it would not be a impediment to people bringing applications just generally for accessory dwellings.
yeah, okay. So I hear at least 3 people. I mean, I'm a little ambivalent about this because I am, you know, concerned about the cost for the homeowner, but I also do want the planning commission to be able to play a role in the BZA's decision-making in certain situations, so,
I could accept that, too.
yeah.
I can accept that. I mean, I think I thought that was the intent, is we're putting together what's by right. And if you're going outside of by right, then it should go through the SUP process. I thought
Yeah.
that's the plan.
That is the plan. It's just sort of, does it go to the planning commission and then the BZA, or does it just go straight to the BZA and skip the planning commission?
I think it should come to the planning commission.
Okay, thank you. Any thoughts on Mr. Kravinsky?
I'm fine with it coming to the planning commission.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, sorry that was a little tortured.
Sounds like we have a consensus on that one. That may be the only one we have a consensus
Yeah.
on. That may be the only one where we all agree.
Addressing. Okay, so I know you had an update on addressing. Separate addressing does not require separate utilities. What is the current staff recommendation on addressing, that we do not require it, but it be allowed?
Yeah, generally, I think, you know, staff's research of this, in terms of best practices, has been sort of mixed. Fairfax, for instance, I believe does not require a separate addressing. I was told from a zoning official in Fairfax that the fire and EMS folks actually preferred the same address be kept for accessory dwellings, but I've heard the opposite from talking to folks in the city. For instance, so it's sort of a mixed bag. Obviously, not requiring them offers the most flexibility. So if someone does build an accessory dwelling for the purposes of having a long-term renter where an address may help them out, then permitting or providing for that, could offer that flexibility. So this is something we can add to the recommendation for next time, and maybe do some more research about whether that's a code thing or like a policy question, and sort of how the city would address that, because that's sort of an outstanding issue as well.
Great. Mr. Krasner, you want to go first?
I was just going to say, I don't know if that needs to be in the zoning ordinance, Typically, addressing is, it's a function that's a combination of right, you know, the fire and EMS and emergency responders, and there are some, there are some, right, subdivision regulations that sometimes inform the decision on that. I will say, as someone who has the misfortune of having a letter after their address in a single-family dwelling, because there wasn't a gap in the numbering, so that, it can be quite confusing for people to find you. I mean, sometimes just having, sharing the same address, well, I guess, it depends on who's living in the unit. If it's family member, obviously they would have really no interest in having their own address. A renter might, have some benefit to it, but it can be very confusing for first responders. It can be very confusing for deliveries. It results in
Having a separate address?
having separate. Yeah, well, because the reality is, on the same lot, you're not going to be able to give it its own number. It's going to have like a letter or half,
Right.
like 203 and a half, Pine Street or something. It's going to be kind of weird, and so that happens in places. We've all seen things like that in other places where you have letters and halves and quarters. I think I once saw a quarter once in some city somewhere, which I thought was cool, but it's confusing. And so, but I don't know if it has to be in the zoning ordinance. I mean, I suppose we could indicate some kind of like position on it from what our position is, but I don't know if it needs to be in the ordinance. I'm not used to seeing something like that in the ordinance, that it has to have its own address or it's prohibited from having it. I don't think I've ever seen that, actually. Obviously, someone might argue that, if you see another address like on the side door, above the side door of the house, it starts to look like a two-family dwelling, which, I would kind of argue these are really not supposed to be a two-family dwelling. It's an accessory unit, I'm thinking of like an interior one. But even for like a detached, if it was visible from the street and had its own number. But I don't know, it's a tricky thing. I've also seen things where you start seeing like multiple doorbells and multiple mailboxes, and it can begin to, change the appearance a little bit. So it's a little bit of a slippery slope, but I don't know if it has to be in the ordinance. It's a long-winded way of saying I don't know if it needs to be in the ordinance. We can kind of maybe debate if we want to make a comment on it, like when we make this recommendation to council, just from a policy standpoint, but I don't know if we have to have code that directs it.
Great.
Thanks.
Mr. Duncan?
If it would help me get a sixth or seventh vote for what I prefer. I feel pretty strongly about addressing, and I've given my speeches about it before, but it's just sort of a matter of transparency. In Fairfax, didn't make any difference, a half dozen houses here or there, but in Falls Church, every household counts, and in terms of student enrollment and, emergency response, mail delivery. It seems to me that all those things are just made a little easier but I would, if it's something that others would, suggest otherwise, I could live with just including language that says it's at the discretion of the person who builds the unit. Because it can always be changed later. If I build one in the backyard and it has a half on it, or it doesn't have a half on it, and then someday I decide it needs to, I think I could probably, so I'm flexible on that.
Okay. Mr. Polinsky?
I will plus one, Mr. Duncan said. I don't think it needs to be in the zoning ordinance. I think it can just be a policy suggestion.
Okay. Mr. Stevens?
Likewise.
Friedlander?
Same.
Mr. Kaminsky?
I would defer to the lawyer whether it needs to be in the ordinance or not. But if it has to be in the ordinance, I feel pretty strongly the homeowner should be allowed to opt to have a separate address or not. If you're renting if you're building this for your mother-in-law or for your grown child, that's one thing. But there's issues of privacy and things like that if you're dealing with another household. And for the main owner to start sorting through the mail of their renter, that seems really inappropriate. So I think if they're building that for the purpose of renting it to an unrelated family, it does seem you need to have a separate address.
Okay, thank you. I would agree with that. Generally, I would leave it up to the homeowner, but I would agree that if it is being rented, I don't know if there's some sort of mechanism in the sort of like what you have to apply to rent. You have to get a license, right? So maybe there's some sort of in that process, like a step that we could implement. Maybe that's the recommendation, implementing a step in the, however you get licensed to be a landlord in the city of Falls Church, you know, to ensure that if it's a detached accessory dwelling, that it has a separate address. I would support that. But generally, I would leave it up to the homeowner as well. I think many people will be building these for their own personal use, for family, for, you know, visitors. Okay, I think we made it through your list, and it's 10:50. I have a few, just like 2 additional things. Are there other, I'm sorry this is like kind of a rushed discussion. Are there other things that people really wanted to share? And we can extend the meeting if we want to. Ms. Friedlander, do you have thoughts? And Mr. Stevens?
I just wanted to comment on some of the comments that we got from the Forestry Commission, or, you know, some of the public comments that I think it's important to just kind of think about in terms of what we put in the policy or what staff follows up with. One of them was, you know, I was in support of the Urban Forestry Commission's recommendation, since we can't really evaluate or do the analysis of the tree canopy coverage if the limits of disturbance doesn't quite make it to that 2,500 square foot, but that maybe there is kind of a program or guidelines for homeowners on how to, you know, techniques for tree preservation to encourage that, and techniques for, you know, stormwater mitigation, and, you know, how to capture those credits or not capture those credits, and leave that to the homeowner to really kind of evaluate while they're, you know, in the process of designing, you know, what they want in their backyards. I thought that was a really good alternative solution to the problem. So I just wanted to kind of mention that, and maybe we should think of something that we
Are
can
you
do.
commenting on like an incentive program, or like just an informational way of, or like an informational piece of
Like
page or
pamphlet.
something
Yeah,
for
like an
folks who are
informational
designing the ADU?
guide, like a set of guidelines, like how do you preserve your tree canopy?
Okay.
Reasons why you would want to, rather than, you know, total replacement, you know, so just kind of the benefits versus not, you know, versus replacement of tree canopy. It's just so that homeowners can kind of have a better understanding if they're, you know, concerned about the
Consider that,
stormwater. But I wasn't suggesting an incentivization program, because I think that's a totally different policy discussion.
Right.
Great, thank you.
So thank you, I appreciate that, thank you.
Mr. Stevens?
Just a quick question for Mr. Trainer. You've added the new lot coverage restriction, 30% coverage maximum of the required rear yard. That wasn't new, though, right? I mean, that's
Right,
in the code already, and you're just applying it to the
Correct.
situation?
Correct. So, yeah, generally, we've talked about, you know, larger kind of lot coverage standards, building coverage, and open space and tree canopy that apply, you know, to all uses in a district. The 30% rear yard area coverage does have an existing limit for accessory structures only.
Yeah. So you're just carrying it over to dwellings?
Right, and so that's what part of the blue shaded area in those site plan kind of diagrams show, is that, you know, obviously not taking into consideration any other, you know, assuming a bald lot, you know, you have the house and then just the open space. It's showing, you know, what the maximum accessory dwelling footprint could be given the size of the lot, the setbacks, and a median size single-family home. I think this is, so 675 square foot footprint would be allowed here. And then the blue area shows, you know, the square footage and the amount of coverage. So in both scenarios, you know, the accessory dwelling is built so that that requirement is met. And they're shown in the same position for, you know, comparison's sake, but you could also build the same size, you know, outside of the required rear yard area. So
So it's not an onerous restriction, then?
Right, and, and again, if it's something that does appear to be a significant detriment to property owners down the line, it could be something that, the city addresses
A
down the
2.0
road.
topic, yeah. I would just say, this was also new to me, so like, if there's a way that we can reference this in the code, sorry, I'm jumping into Mr. Stevens'
No, I'm
question.
done.
This was my same, I had this same question. If there's a way that like we can reference this in the code, so homeowners are aware that that is among the requirements, like, right, like, so that they don't have to go hunting for it.
Like in like a web page or something when people are doing
No,
research
I mean, like,
about-
in the, I can send some suggestions to you, like, in the draft code that you have, there's a way to just reference like that, you know.
In like the new accessory dwelling
Yeah.
section must comply with?
Yes, must
Gotcha.
comply, like, add that to the list, so
Sure.
people know,
Yeah.
oh, there's a limit on like how much building I can put in my rear,
That's- okay.
my rear yard.
Yep.
You don't need to, like, because maybe we changed that limit over time, so maybe you don't need to
Right.
use the number, but you can reference the relevant other section.
Yeah.
Right, so that would be, just give them a clue. And then my only other question, I'm still thinking about windows. So currently, you have any portion of a detached accessory dwelling above 1 story that contains windows must be set back at least 10 feet from any property line. I would like to propose adding to that, unless the window does not allow visibility into the side yard of the adjacent lot, such as a clear story window or a translucent window. I'm all about letting people to get light into their buildings. It may be kind of a moot point anyway, if we're at 15 feet and 1 story at a 5-foot setback, and we're going to jump to 20 feet, which would allow the 1.5 stories at a 10-foot setback. But if we're open to having sort of like a sliding scale of setbacks in between, I'd like to give homeowners flexibility to have windows if they have a 16-foot tall AD without having to jump to a 10-foot setback. So that's it from me. Any other wish list items, things you all wanted to raise?
I disagree on the window thing. I forgot about that. That was a good thing to mention. Because like I said before, sometimes it's counterproductive. Like, I understand the privacy thing, but a blank wall can be actually a lot worse for someone to stare at than something that breaks it up with windows. So I would agree, we want to allow for some of that. I mean, privacy is a legitimate concern, but a blank wall, especially once you get above 1 story, is pretty bad to have looming over you. Even if it might give you privacy, it's kind of ugly, so.
Ms. Friedlander?
Thank you. I do want to kind of piggyback on that. The idea
Yeah.
of having a blank wall is not appealing. I have one right up against my backyard. And so I'm wondering too, because that setback where, that blue area is so large, and, there's been some public comment also, and the postcards have been great, and I think the more that we can talk about this, maybe more people will understand that this is actually happening. I'm just concerned that since the setbacks, like, we're changing that, I think people might not know that their neighbor is going to be building something until it's too late. So I would kind of want to put some kind of notification to the neighbors when an application comes in, so that at least they're aware and they can actually speak to their neighbor about it, because they might not be, always talking about, neighborly things. So I mean, I think that would be kind of an important thing to allow the other neighbors to have an understanding of what's about to happen next door, and be able to have that discussion.
So are you talking about a notification before any final consideration, or when?
Yeah, so that at least like the next door neighbor knows that this application went in, it would be good for that neighbor to be notified.
Oh, so are you, so like
Like
if
as
someone
the-
submits an application for an accessory dwelling under, if the proposal gets adopted under any new regulations, some notification mechanism for neighbors when a neighbor submits a by right application for an accessory dwelling?
Yeah, I think that kind of responds to the other neighbor's rights.
Sure.
Right, because we're changing what the setback is for a couple of things, right, for just this. And so I think people may not be really focused on that until it's happening in their backyard.
Sure.
So,
If I will say, if it does trigger a grading plan, that 2,500 square feet, then neighbors would be notified. But we can look at what options might be available if it doesn't meet that requirement.
yeah, I feel like it's this, yeah, can we look at what those options might be? Because we've already kind of determined a lot of these might not trigger that requirement, so, thank you.
Thanks.
Great, thank you all. We're at 11 PM. Mr. Fuller, I think, well, I mean, I think we maybe have exhausted this item unless Mr. Duncan has one last
No,
minute
I
thing.
was going to move that
Okay.
we extend the meeting to 11:15 and then go home.
Okay, hopefully we won't have to even go that long. Do we have a second for 11:15?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. All right, thank you all for the discussion. I think we can move on to information items. Any planning commissioners' reports? Oh, we have one from Mr.
30
Duncan.
seconds. Mr. Polinsky and
A
I.
15-minute report.
I know.
Get
It's
ready.
not a 15-minute. Mr. Polinsky and I, at his direction mostly, had a phone call with the Mill Creek developers of Founders Road 2 and some of his neighbors on around the corner from where I am on Friday, and discussed the stage at which we are at on Founders 2, which is going to require even more cooperation and coordination between the city and its staff and Mill Creek in terms of paving and all the other things that go into getting a building up and going. Mr. Hollern has sent a note around today giving some more details on who's responsible for the paving, and it was a helpful response, and we appreciate that. But Danny and I are going to try to stay on top of, he's been on top of it for years now, but we're going to try in the next couple of months to, keep you appraised of what's going on, and hopefully the opening will be happy and a peaceful event.
Thank you both for advocating for your community. Any other reports? Okay. I think, Mr. Fuller, we have a director's report.
Thank you. In terms of, I'm really just going to go to upcoming schedule.
Yep.
So your next meeting scheduled for March 5th. We have the accessory dwelling unit public hearing. Then we have the CIP back for public hearing. Then we have the Econo-Wise closet site plan work session on that. And then we have tentatively scheduled the Broad in Washington. It's an easement that's being vacated. It's just kind of a basic thing, but it requires going to council. So depending on whether council takes this up and makes their agenda is kind of whether we have it on theirs. So as soon as they tee it up, and we were anticipating it, being available for the next meeting, but it may be later. So talking about the advance previously, we had identified March 26th, which was the last Wednesday of the month, and I had secured a room for that. However, looking at our schedule, there may be an opportunity to have it on March 19th. Both items, the Quinn site plan final action and the Maple and Annandale special exception, which has been resubmitted work session, there's some issues that need to be kind of worked out before those are ready to come before you. One is, on the Quinn site plan, we're kind of finalizing the sewer and how that's going, and so it's going to take another submission and to kind of finalize that. We want to have that in final form. Then on Maple and Annandale, the land ownership, EDA does own part of the land. It's part of the application, and that hasn't been finalized in some terms of agreement. And so we are looking at that as something that, we want to have in some formal agreement before we kind of move forward with the EDA or city land, being part of the application. And so we've been, asking for that for a bit. And so these may move off the 19th. It's likely now. And so that meeting is totally free for the advance, so.
Well, that would be terrific
Yeah.
to not add a third
So we
meeting
could
in
use a
March.
regular meeting
Yeah.
night, so, anyway.
Oh, no.
March 20th?
Yeah, I think that was a date that worked for all of us.
Yes, 26th, yes, 25th, 19th, no.
Well, I guess we could have the option of canceling the 19th and instead doing the 26th.
This is true.
Yeah.
Yes. That could
Sorry.
be even a better
No,
option.
that's
Visiting
okay.
colleges with my son, he has,
Oh,
yeah.
that's exciting.
So anyway, so I do have the Dogwood Room reserved for
Okay,
the
so let's-
26th.
you
I've been
can-
able to reserve that, and that we have an agenda that we discussed previously. I could, type that up and send that out as a reminder of what we agreed to.
Could you include it in our materials for March 5th?
Yes,
In the
of course.
director's report?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe we could give,
Yeah.
if there's any feedback or
Yeah.
on that.
And
That'd be
then
great.
I'll send a separate correspondence to you as chair, updating you on what's happening with the 19th, maybe even prior to that.
Okay.
If I have some, final disposition of that, so. All right, in terms of the affordable living policy, we had that tentatively coming up on April 2nd. We're waiting for a final schedule. Brandon did present tonight and, indicated that that was upcoming. So we'll wait for his final schedule. So anyway, that's it for the upcoming meetings. That's all I had to report.
Great.
The final on accessory dwellings, public hearing and final action, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
March 5th. That's
Yes.
our
Let
our
people-
next meeting.
Let people know to come hear the really stirring speeches. They want to come on March the 5th.
They can save them for council.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Have a good night. I think we are adjourned. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
No,
No.
you can just do it.
Do it. We're adjourning us. Good night.